A speedboat tears through the emerald waters of Thailand's Phi Islands, and two people who haven't spoken in 3 years are about to steal something that doesn't belong to them. Luke Truman crouches at the bow, wet hair plastered to his forehead, grinning like he's on the world's best vacation instead of fleeing armed pursuers. His sister Charlotte sits rigid at the helm, knuckles white on the throttle, mentally calculating how many international laws they're currently breaking. Behind them, bullets slice through the spray. Welcome to family reunion, Ritchie style. This isn't your typical treasure hunt movie, and that opening chase-all whip pans, gunfire percussion, and tropical chaos makes it clear from frame one. Guy Ritchie, the director who made his name with London Gangsters and Quick-Cut Chaos and Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, has taken his kinetic sensibilities global. But Fountain of Youth isn't just Ritchie doing Indiana Jones. It's something more specific, more volatile. It's what happens when you cross a heist film's precision with an adventure movie's scope, and power it all with the emotional live wire of two siblings who've spent years perfecting the art of resenting each other. The film dropped on Apple TV Plus in May 2025, arriving at a moment when audiences were hungry for big-scale adventure that didn't rely on superheroes or franchises. What they got was a globe-trotting puzzle box wrapped around a family drama, written by James Vanderbilt, and brought to life by a cast that includes John Krasinski as the reckless treasure hunter Luke, Natalie Portman as his Type A lawyer sister Charlotte, Isa Gonzalez as the enigmatic Esme, and Domhnall Gleeson as Owen Carver, a colleague with secrets that run deeper than the ocean trenches they're about to explore. Here's what you need to know about the world of this film. Immortality exists, and it'll cost you everything you love. The Fountain of Youth isn't a myth. It's real. It's findable. And according to the research of recently deceased archaeologist Richard Truman, it's hidden somewhere along a trail of clues spanning 3 continents. Richard spent his entire career chasing this legend, neglecting his kids in the process, and now he's gone, leaving behind a cryptic map, a lifetime of unfinished business, and 2 adult children who channel their grief in spectacularly different ways. Luke handles it by doubling down on his father's obsession, chasing leads with the manic energy of someone who thinks if he solves this mystery, he'll finally earn approval from a man who's no longer around to give it. Charlotte handles it by trying to maintain control of her rapidly deteriorating life. She's in the middle of a messy divorce, fighting for custody of her daughter, and the last thing she needs is her disaster of a brother dragging her into one of their father's wild goose chases. But when Luke shows up claiming he's cracked their dad's research and needs her expertise to decode the next clue, she makes the catastrophically poor decision to say yes. Just one quick trip to Thailand to authenticate a tablet. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turns out. That tablet Luke found. It's not just an archaeological curiosity. It's a genuine piece of the puzzle. And they're not the only ones who know about it. Enter Owen Carver, Charlotte's charming colleague from the university, who just happens to be in Thailand on research and offers to help. And Esme, a mysterious woman who seems to be tracking their every move with the kind of resources that suggest serious backing. Within hours of touching down in Bangkok, Luke and Charlotte go from translating ancient inscriptions to running for their lives through floating markets and temple complexes. And that speedboat chase is just the beginning. This is where Ritchie's directorial DNA becomes crucial to understanding what makes Fountain of Youth tick differently than other adventure films. The heist genre, which Ritchie knows intimately, is all about the plan, the careful assembly of a crew, each member bringing specialized skills, the elaborate choreography of the job itself. Films like Ocean's 11 or The Italian Job find their pleasure in watching competent people execute complex schemes. But Ritchie's applying that structural logic to treasure hunting, and he's doing it with siblings who are spectacular at their individual specialties, but disastrous at working together. Luke's the field operative, charming, reckless, fluent in 5 languages, capable of talking his way into, and occasionally out of, anywhere. He's got his father's instincts for reading ancient puzzles and a parkour enthusiast's approach to escaping dangerous situations. Charlotte's the researcher, meticulous, brilliant, with a photographic memory for historical texts and zero tolerance for improvisation. Separately, they're formidable. Together, they're a constant argument, interrupted by occasional bursts of reluctant teamwork, and Ritchie films their dynamic with the same rapid-fire energy he brought to the banter in Sherlock Holmes. The film's structure follows the Heist template, but remixes it for adventure. Instead of assembling a crew to rob a casino, we're watching Luke and Charlotte gather pieces of an ancient puzzle while staying one step ahead of people who want to kill them for it. Each location, Thailand, London, and eventually a pyramid in an undisclosed location that the film keeps tantalizingly vague, presents a new challenge that requires both physical daring and intellectual problem-solving. Its national treasure energy filtered through Ritchie's aesthetic of controlled chaos, where even exposition gets delivered at machine gun pace over a montage of passport stamps and airplane routes. But what elevates this beyond a simple treasure hunt is the thematic weight hiding underneath the action. The fountain of youth, as Luke and Charlotte eventually learn, comes with a curse. Drink from it, and you gain immortality, but everyone you love will die. It's a moral test disguised as a mythological artifact, and it forces the film to ask, what's the point of living forever if you have to do it alone? Their father knew this. He discovered the truth about the fountain's cost years ago, and it's implied that his obsessive quest wasn't about achieving immortality, but about understanding whether the choice would even be worth making. This revelation recontextualizes everything. Richard Truman wasn't a selfish, obsessive abandoning his family for glory. He was wrestling with an impossible question about sacrifice and legacy. Did he neglect his kids? Absolutely. But he was also trying to shield them from a discovery that could destroy them. Luke's quest to finish his father's work isn't just about treasure hunting. It's about understanding the man who raised him at arm's length. And Charlotte's reluctant participation isn't just about helping her brother. It's about confronting the parts of herself that are more like their father than she'd ever want to admit. The film exists in 2025's particular cultural moment, arriving when adventure films have largely been absorbed into superhero franchises or relegated to streaming. There's something refreshingly old school about Fountain of Youth's commitment to practical locations, real stunts, and a story that doesn't require 6 previous films of homework to understand. But it's not nostalgia. Ritchie's bringing his contemporary sensibilities, the kinetic editing, the propulsive soundtrack, the ethnic and gender diversity in the cast to a genre that often felt frozen in the 1980s. The cast helped sell this balance between classic adventure and modern execution. John Krasinski, who spent years proving he's more than Jim from The Office, brings an easy charisma to Luke that makes his recklessness feel charming rather than stupid. He's clearly doing a lot of his own stunt work, and there's a physicality to his performance. The way he moves through spaces, the split-second decisions in action sequences that reads as someone who's been doing this for years. Natalie Portman gives Charlotte layers beyond uptight sister who needs to loosen up. Yes, she's controlling and cautious, but the film shows us why. She's fighting for custody of her daughter, trying to maintain some stability in a life that's falling apart, and her brother's chaos represents everything she's trying to escape. Their dynamic is the heart of the film. These aren't siblings who bicker cutely and then hug it out. They have years of legitimate grievances, different ways of processing their father's death, and fundamentally incompatible approaches to risk. When they argue, and they argue constantly, it feels earned, but so do the moments when they sync up, when Charlotte's research unlocks a clue, and Luke's instincts guide them through the execution, and for just a second, they operate as the team they could have been, if their dad had stuck around to raise them properly. The supporting players orbit this central dynamic effectively. Domhnall Gleeson's Owen Carver initially reads as comic relief, the bumbling academic tagging along, but there's something slightly off about his eagerness to help, and Gleeson plays the ambiguity perfectly. Isa Gonzalez's is harder to pin down, appearing and disappearing at crucial moments, her motivations staying opaque until the film's ready to reveal them. The script keeps us guessing about allegiances, which is crucial for maintaining tension in a treasure hunt, where the stakes need to escalate beyond who finds the thing first. Fountain of Youth runs just over 2 hours, and Ritchie paces it like a heist film quick setup, escalating complications, multiple reveals that shift our understanding of what's really happening. The first act establishes the siblings and the quest. The second act becomes a chase across continents as they decode clues while evading Esme and dealing with Owen's increasingly suspicious behavior. The third act converges on the fountain itself, where the film shifts from adventure to genuine moral drama. What makes this structure work is that Ritchie never loses sight of the emotional through line. Every action sequence, every puzzle they solve, every narrow escape, it's all in service of forcing Luke and Charlotte to confront their relationship and their father's legacy. The fountain isn't just the MacGuffin. It's the question their family's been avoiding. What would you sacrifice for immortality? For success? For validation? And what does it cost the people around you when you make that choice? The film's visual approach blends Ritchie's trademark style with the demands of adventure storytelling. You get his signature whip pans, freeze frames for character introductions, and rapid-fire montages, but deployed in service of exotic locations and archaeological mysteries. The Thailand sequence is all saturated colors and chaotic energy. London gets a grayer, more classical treatment that reflects Charlotte's world, and the final pyramid location shot, with a combination of practical sets and location work, feels genuinely ancient and dangerous. Ritchie's always been great at using environments to enhance character and story, and here he's working with a bigger canvas than his usual London streets. There's also a self-awareness to how the film engages with adventure movie tropes. Luke makes a joke about belonging in a museum. That's clearly an Indiana Jones reference. Charlotte points out the statistical improbability of them surviving their various scrapes. The script, by Vanderbilt, knows we've seen these movies before and plays with our expectations, sometimes delivering what we expect, sometimes zigging when we think it'll zag. It's not parody, but it's aware of its genre lineage and comfortable enough to acknowledge it. What Fountain of Youth ultimately represents is a specific type of big-budget entertainment that's become increasingly rare, the star-driven, non-franchise adventure film, with stakes that feel personal rather than world-ending. It's not trying to launch a cinematic universe. It's telling one complete story about two people who need to figure out if they're family in more than just biological terms, and using an ancient mythological puzzle as the framework to force that reckoning. The film asks, what does it mean to finish your father's work? Is it about validation, understanding, or something else entirely? And when you're offered immortality at the cost of everyone you love, is that even a choice worth considering? These questions drive everything that follows, from speedboat chases in Thailand to the final confrontation at the fountain itself. So when that opening sequence explodes onto the screen, Luke and Charlotte stealing a tablet, arguing while bullets fly, their chemistry a mix of genuine affection and barely suppressed rage. We're not just watching an action scene. We're watching a relationship that's about to be stress-tested across 3 continents and several thousand years of mythology. And we're about to find out if treasure hunting can fix a broken family, or if some damage runs too deep even for magical fountains to heal. That's where this story lives, in the space between myth and memory, between adventure and reconciliation, between adventure and reconciliation, between the treasure you're chasing and the family you've been running from. Guy Ritchie's taken his gifts for kinetic storytelling and applied them to a genre that desperately needed his particular energy. The result is something that feels both classical and contemporary. A film that respects the adventure tradition while updating it for audiences who want their spectacle with a side of emotional substance. The Fountain of Youth is out there, hidden somewhere in the world's forgotten corners. And Luke and Charlotte Truman are about to find it. Whether that's a good thing or a catastrophe, well, that's what the next 2 hours are for. The film doesn't waste time with slow burns. We meet Luke Truman 3 weeks after his father's funeral, and he's already breaking into a private collection in Istanbul. The sequence is pure Ritchie freeze-frame introduction. With stats overlaid, Luke Truman, 34, speaks 5 languages, arrested in 4 countries, a jazz-inflected score pulsing underneath, and Krasinski moving through the space with practiced efficiency. He's not here for money. He's here for a fragment of pottery that his father's notes suggested might contain coordinates. What's immediately clear is that Luke's good at this. Too good. The way he bypasses security, sweet-talks the night guard in Turkish, and locates the exact piece he needs suggests this isn't his first unauthorized archaeological acquisition. But there's also something slightly desperate in how he photographs the fragment, cross-referencing it against his father's journals right there in the gallery. He's not a professional thief. He's a son trying to decode his dad's last obsession. Cut to Charlotte, and the tonal shift is deliberate. She's in a Boston courtroom, immaculately dressed, arguing a custody case her own. Portman plays this scene with controlled fury, every word measured, as her ex-husband's lawyer paints her as an unstable academic who prioritizes research over parenting. The accusation stings because there's truth in it. Charlotte's inherited her father's intensity, his single-minded focus when a problem needs solving. Her daughter Zoe watches from the gallery, and the look between them carries years of complicated history. Charlotte's fighting to prove she's not her father, even as she exhibits all his tendencies. The judge defers his decision, which means Charlotte's in limbo. She exits the courthouse to 17 missed calls from Luke. She doesn't answer. They haven't spoken since the funeral, where Luke made a scene about continuing their father's work, and Charlotte told him to grow up and get a real job. That argument, shown in flashback, reveals the fundamental divide. Luke thinks finishing the quest honors their dad's memory. Charlotte thinks it perpetuates the obsession that ruined their childhood. But Luke's persistent, and eventually he shows up at her apartment with Thai takeout and that pottery fragment's photographs. The scene that follows is a masterclass in exposition disguised as sibling conflict. Luke explains what he's found. The coordinates lead to a temple in Thailand that matches descriptions in their father's notes about a tablet predating known civilizations. Charlotte, despite herself, gets drawn into the puzzle. She can't help it. Her brain works like this: pattern recognition and historical cross-referencing, and Luke knows exactly which intellectual buttons to push. Vanderbilt's script uses this scene to establish the film's core mythology efficiently. Richard Truman wasn't chasing a generic fountain. He believed the legend originated from a real source, hidden by an ancient civilization that understood its terrible cost. The tablet Luke's located supposedly contains the next clue in a trail designed to test worthiness only. Those willing to sacrifice everything would complete the journey. Charlotte calls it pseudo-archaeological nonsense, but she agrees to authenticate the tablet if Luke finds it, just to prove it's a hoax. One trip, in and out. Then he'll accept their father was chasing fairy tales. They fly to Bangkok, and Ritchie uses the travel montage to show us how differently they operate. Luke charms flight attendants, sleeps through turbulence, arrives energized. Charlotte works the entire flight, reviewing research, preparing authentication protocols, trying to maintain control over variables. The visual contrast is pointed Luke in rumpled linen, Charlotte in structured blazer, two people approaching the same destination from opposite directions. The tablet supposedly held in a private collection owned by a Thai businessman named Narong, who's agreed to let them examine it. But when they arrive at his estate outside Chiang Mai, Owen Carver's already there. This is Charlotte's colleague from Boston University, charming and slightly bumbling, who claims he's in Thailand researching temple architecture and heard through academic channels about this viewing. Gleason plays Owen as relentlessly friendly, almost aggressively helpful, and there's something about his eagerness that doesn't quite land right. Luke picks up on it immediately, but Charlotte dismisses his suspicion as paranoia. The tablet examination scene shows Charlotte in her element. She uses specialized equipment, cross-references linguistic patterns, carbon dating analysis, the methodical breakdown of an artifact to extract information. And she has to admit, grudgingly, that it's genuine, pre-Columbian, possibly pre-Sumerian, with glyphs that match notations in their father's journals. The inscriptions reference the water that binds and breaks, and coordinate markers that, when plotted, point to a location in the Andaman Sea. This is where the film shifts from family drama to heist adventure hybrid. Because the moment Charlotte confirms authenticity, Everything goes wrong. Armed men storm Narong's estate. These aren't amateurs. They move with military precision, clearly after the tablet. Luke, Charlotte, and Owen barely escape in Narong's speedboat, and suddenly we're in that opening chase sequence, bullet stitching across water, tropical islands blurring past. Ritchie shoots the escape with his characteristic kineticism whip hands between pursuers and pursued, Charlotte's white-knuckled steering intercut with Luke returning fire, Owen screaming unhelpfully in the background. But what makes it work is that the action reveals character. Luke's clearly done this before, his movements practiced. Charlotte's terrified but functional, her brain still problem-solving even while dodging bullets. And Owen's panic seems genuine, which either means he's innocent or an excellent actor. They lose the pursuers in a maze of karst islands and wash up at a fishing village, soaked and shaken. The tablet's gone. Luke had to dump it during the chase to lighten the boat, but Charlotte photographed the inscriptions, and as they catch their breath in a beachside cafe, she starts decoding. This sequence lets Portman showcase Charlotte's intelligence without making it feel like a lecture. She talks through the puzzle aloud, bouncing ideas off Luke, who contributes historical context from their father's research. Owen adds occasional observations that are either remarkably insightful or suspiciously well-informed, depending on your perspective. The glyphs point to an underwater, location a sunken structure in the Andaman Sea that supposedly houses the next piece of the puzzle. Charlotte argues they should contact authorities, report the attack, hand this over to legitimate archaeologists. But Luke counters, whoever attacked them has resources, connections, and clearly doesn't care about legality. Going official might get them killed. Their only advantage is that Charlotte has the translation and the attackers don't. It's a classic adventure movie dilemma, but the film earns it through the sibling dynamic. Charlotte doesn't trust Luke's judgment because his judgment has historically been terrible. Luke doesn't trust Charlotte's caution because it looks like fear disguised as responsibility. They argue in that specific way siblings do, dredging up childhood grievances while technically discussing present circumstances. Owen tries to mediate, suggesting compromise, which just annoys them both. Enter Esme. She finds them at their hotel that evening, appearing in their room like smoke, and Gonzalez plays the introduction with dangerous ambiguity. She knows who they are. She knows what they're after. And she has a proposal. She represents interests who want the fountain found, but not claimed. If Luke and Charlotte locate it and document its existence, her employers will ensure they're protected and compensated. Refuse, and the people who attacked them in Thailand will seem friendly by comparison. Luke asks the obvious question, who are you working for? Esme's answer is perfectly calibrated. Non-information, people who understand what the fountain really is and want to make sure it doesn't fall into wrong hands. Charlotte's skeptical "this" is extortion, dressed as partnership. But they don't have many options. Esme's offering resources, diving equipment, transportation, intel on their attackers, and she's clearly not leaving them a choice. The film uses this forced alliance to raise stakes while maintaining ambiguity. We don't know if Esme is genuinely protective or setting them up. Her motives stay opaque, which creates productive tension. What's clear is that the game's gotten bigger. This isn't just about finishing Dad's research anymore. There are organizations tracking the fountain, people willing to kill for it, and Luke and Charlotte are caught in the middle. The act's final sequence is the underwater dive. With Esme's equipment, they locate the sunken structure, an artificial formation that shouldn't exist in this location, built from materials that predate recorded civilization in this region. Ritchie shoots the underwater sequences with surprising beauty, the chaos of his usual style replaced by eerie calm. Shafts of light through murky water, Luke and Charlotte communicating by gesture, the weight of ocean and history pressing down. Inside the structure, they find a chamber with walls covered in glyphs, and the central pedestal holding a crystalline artifact. Charlotte photographs everything while Luke secures the artifact. But there's a complication. Owen's tank is malfunctioning, and they have to abort faster than planned. The ascent is tense. Owen genuinely struggling, Luke helping him while Charlotte clutches the artifact and her camera. They surface to find Esme's boat, surrounded by another vessel, the same crew who attacked them in Thailand. Esme's people engage them while Luke, Charlotte, and Owen scramble aboard, and there's a brief firefight that ends with Esme's superior resources driving off the attackers. But the message is clear. Someone else is tracking them. Someone with comparable resources and zero interest in cooperation. Back in their hotel, Charlotte processes the photographs while Luke examines the artifact. Owen's visibly shaken from the near-death experience, and Gleason plays it with enough vulnerability that we almost forget to be suspicious of him. Esme disappears to handle security, which means Luke and Charlotte finally get a moment alone to process. The scene that follows is the emotional core of Act 1. Charlotte's hands shake as she enhances photographs, the adrenaline crash hitting. Luke notices and does something uncharacteristic. Slows down, makes tea, sits with her without pushing. They talk about their dad, really talk, maybe for the first time since his death. Charlotte admits she's scared, not of the danger, but of becoming him so obsessed with solving puzzles that she loses everything else. Luke confesses he's been chasing this because he doesn't know what else to do. Their father's work was the only thing that made him feel connected to the man. It's a quiet moment in a loud movie, and both actors underplay it beautifully. No grand declarations, just two people who've been running parallel, finally acknowledging the gap between them. Charlotte asks why this matters so much, finishing the quest. Luke's answer is honest, because maybe if he understands what their dad was searching for, he'll understand why it was worth sacrificing his family. The artifact's translation interrupts the moment. Charlotte's cross-referenced the glyphs with her father's notes and found a pattern. The fountain isn't a single location. It's a convergence point guarded by 3 keys. They found the first. The second is in London, hidden in plain sight in a location connected to their father's early research. And the third's location will only be revealed once they have the second. London means going home, back to the university where both their parents taught, where Charlotte still works, where their father's office remains exactly as he left it. Luke sees it as the next logical step. Charlotte sees it as a trap returning to the place where their dysfunction began. But Esme makes the decision for them. Her intelligence suggests the attackers are part of an organization called the Hegemony, wealthy collectors who believe the fountain can be controlled and commodified. They're already mobilizing resources in London. If Luke and Charlotte want to stay ahead, they need to move now. The act ends with departure. Another flight, but this time there's a shift. Luke and Charlotte sit together, reviewing notes. The antagonism from earlier, replaced by wary cooperation. They're not fixed, not even close, but they're starting to operate as a team rather than 2 people forced into proximity. Owen joins them, still friendly, still helpful, and as he points out a detail in Charlotte's translation, the camera lingers on his face just long enough to make us wonder. Is he genuinely invested, or is this performance? The film's not telling yet. Act 1 has done its job, established characters, mythology, stakes, and alliances. We know who Luke and Charlotte are, what they're after, and what it cost them emotionally to pursue it. We've met allies whose loyalties remain questionable, and enemies whose resources seem unlimited. And we're headed to London, where the past isn't buried. It's waiting. The fountain's real, the danger's genuine, and 2 siblings who spent years avoiding each other are now bound together in a quest that might save them or destroy them completely. That's the setup. Now comes the escalation. London greets them with rain, because of course it does. Charlotte hasn't been back to the university since her father's memorial service, and walking through those gates feels like stepping into a museum of her own damage. Luke moves through campus with false confidence, nodding at faculty he half remembers. But there's tension in his shoulders that wasn't there in Thailand. This is where they grew up, professors' kids haunting library stacks while Dad ignored them for manuscripts. Coming back means confronting ghosts that don't have the decency to stay dead. Richard Truman's office remains untouched, preserved by the department like a shrine to academic obsession. The university hasn't cleared it, yet bureaucracy moves slowly. And Charlotte's been avoiding the task of sorting through decades of her father's research. Now that avoidance pays off. They enter to find exactly what they need. Walls covered in maps, tables buried under journals, and filing cabinets stuffed with a lifetime of fountain research. Owen's usefulness becomes apparent here. He has university access, can requisition equipment without raising flags, and knows which librarians will look the other way when they request restricted materials. Gleason plays these moments with such earnest hopefulness that you almost forget to question why he's so prepared for this specific situation. Charlotte trusts him because they've been colleagues for 3 years. Luke doesn't trust anyone who's this conveniently positioned. The search through Richard's office becomes an archaeological dig through family history. Charlotte finds letters she wrote to her dad from summer camp that he apparently kept but never mentioned. Luke discovers expense reports showing their father liquidated his retirement fund to finance expeditions. Every drawer reveals another piece of the man they thought they knew, and none of it adds up to a complete picture. Ritchie shoots this sequence with unusual stillness, letting the actors discover props organically, the camera observing rather than directing. What they're searching for is the connection between the Thai artifact and London. Charlotte's translation indicated the second key relates to the scholar's light, which their father interpreted as referencing the Enlightenment. Richard's notes suggest he believed a piece of the puzzle was hidden in the British Museum, camouflaged among legitimate antiquities by someone who understood its significance. The British Museum sequence showcases Ritchie's ability to make familiar locations feel fresh. He shoots the vast halls with roaming Steadicam, Luke and Charlotte moving through crowds of tourists while searching for something that shouldn't exist among the carefully catalogued collections. Owen guides them to the Mesopotamian section, where their father's notes indicated an artifact misattributed to Babylonian origin. What makes this work as a heist sequence is the procedural detail. Charlotte uses her academic credentials to request closer examination of a specific tablet. She has to maintain composure, act like this is routine research while her heart's hammering. Luke creates distractions asking guides elaborate questions, accidentally triggering alarms in other sections, classic misdirection. And Owen runs interference with security, his university connections, and bumbling charm, keeping officials occupied. The tablet they need is smaller than expected, clay marked with glyphs that match the Thai artifact's linguistic patterns. Charlotte photographs it quickly, aware that museum cameras are tracking their every move. But as she captures the final image, she notices something. The glyphs aren't just instructions, they're a warning. This is where the film shifts tonally. Up until now, the fountain's been presented as pure legend, maybe real, but probably harmless. The warning changes everything. Charlotte translates it back at a coffee shop, the three of them huddled over her laptop, and the text is explicit. The water grants life unending but severs all bonds of blood and love. Those who drink shall watch, all they cherish turn to dust. Luke's initial reaction is dismissal. Ancient cultures love dramatic warnings to protect sacred sites. But Charlotte sees it differently. If the fountain actually exists and actually works, this curse isn't metaphorical. It's the mechanism. Immortality achieved by cutting you off from human connection, forcing you to watch everyone you love age and die while you persist. That's not a gift. That's a horror. Owen goes quiet, and when he speaks, he asks a question that seems innocent but lands wrong. Did your father know about this? About the cost? Charlotte and Luke exchange looks, the same realization hitting simultaneously. Of course he knew. That's why Richard spent years chasing the fountain but never seemed interested in actually using it. He wasn't seeking immortality. He was trying to understand if the choice would corrupt someone, if the promise of eternal life would be worth the guarantee of eternal loneliness. This reframes their entire quest. They're not treasure hunting. They're walking the same path their father did, confronting the same terrible question. And Luke realizes with sick certainty that Richard kept searching because he needed to know, would his children, if given the choice, choose differently than he did? Would they have the strength to refuse? The museum photographs reveal coordinates pointing to a location outside London, specifically a Victorian-era estate that Richard visited repeatedly in his final years. But before they can plan their next move, Charlotte's phone rings. It's her lawyer. The custody hearing's been moved up. She has to appear in Boston tomorrow, or she forfeits. This creates the film's most human conflict. Luke argues she can't leave now, they're too close, and the hegemony's clearly tracking them. Charlotte counters that her daughter matters more than any mythological artifact. If she loses custody because she's off chasing their dad's delusions, she becomes exactly what she's been fighting not to be. It's the choice their father never made. Family versus obsession. And Charlotte's choosing family. Luke doesn't take it well. He accuses her of quitting, of using Zoe as an excuse, of being too scared to see this through. Charlotte fires back that he's so desperate for their dad's approval that he'd rather chase a dead man's fantasies than deal with actual living relationships. It's the fight that's been brewing since Thailand, maybe since their father's funeral, and Krasinski and Portman play it with raw hurt. These aren't movie arguments. These are real sibling wounds, years old, finally erupting. Owen attempts to mediate, suggesting compromise. Charlotte returns for the hearing while he and Luke continue the search. But something about how quickly he offers this solution triggers Luke's suspicion. Why is Owen so invested in keeping the search moving? Who exactly benefits if they find the fountain? Charlotte books a flight, and there's a scene at her hotel where she packs while Luke watches from the doorway. Neither apologizes, but there's regret in the silence. Charlotte breaks it by saying she'll be back in 48 hours after the hearing. She's not abandoning this, just prioritizing. Luke nods, and in a rare moment of vulnerability, tells her he gets it. He doesn't agree, but he understands. After Charlotte leaves for the airport, Owen suggests he and Luke scout the Victorian estate location. It's late evening, probably too dark to accomplish much, but Owen argues they should at least verify the coordinates. Luke agrees, partly because forward momentum feels better than sitting still, partly because he wants to see what Owen does when Charlotte's not around to observe. The estate is called Blackwood Manor, abandoned since the 1990s, scheduled for demolition that keeps getting delayed. It's exactly the kind of location where secret societies would hide ancient artifacts, forgotten, inaccessible, moldering with bureaucratic neglect. Owen produces keys, which should be the first major red flag, but he explains them away as university research access. Inside, the manor's been stripped of valuables but retains its bones grand staircases, libraries with empty shelves, a study with walls designed to hide compartments. Owen leads Luke directly to the study, too directly, and produces their father's journal, not a copy, the original, which Owen shouldn't have. And that's when the pretense drops. Gleason's performance shifts, the bumbling academic persona evaporating. Owen's been working for the hegemony since before Thailand, assigned to monitor the Truman children after Richard's death in case they continued his research. Every helpful suggestion, every convenient access, every moment of seeming coincidence, calculated. He's been herding them toward the fountain like sheep to slaughter. Luke's immediate response is violence. He lunges at Owen. Years of martial training kicking in. But Owen's prepared. He's brought backup. Hegemony operatives who emerge from the manor's shadows. What follows is a brutal fight sequence that Ritchie shoots with handheld intensity. Luke against 4 trained fighters in a Victorian study, using furniture as weapons and environment as advantage. Luke's good, genuinely skilled, but he's outnumbered. He manages to incapacitate 2 operatives and grab the journal before crashing through a window into the manor's overgrown gardens. The fall should injure him seriously, but adrenaline and desperation keep him moving. He runs, crashing through dead hedges and over collapsed walls, with Owen directing the pursuit from inside. Cut to Charlotte at Heathrow, waiting for her Boston flight, scrolling through the photographs she took at the British Museum. Something nags at her about the glyphs. A pattern she missed. She enhances one image and sees it, a secondary inscription, almost invisible, that reads like a riddle. The third key lies where the guardian sleeps beneath stone and water. Her archaeologist brain processes this automatically: stone and water, guardian, sleeping. A tomb. Specifically, a flooded tomb. Her phone buzzes. Text from Luke. Just coordinates in 2 words. Owen's heavenly. Charlotte stares at the message, watching her flight board, facing the choice in real time. Boston and custody, or London and Luke in danger. Zoe's face flashes through her mind, then their father's office, then Luke grinning on that speedboat in Thailand. She doesn't board. She books a car instead, punching in Luke's coordinates, and calls her lawyer to explain she's not making the hearing. The lawyer's response is unambiguous. This will likely cost her custody. Charlotte knows. She's doing it anyway. Maybe that makes her their father's daughter after all. Luke's coordinates lead Charlotte to a warehouse district in East London, industrial and deserted. She finds him in a shuttered factory, bleeding from the window escape, still clutching their father's journal. The reunion's not sentimental. Charlotte immediately starts field dressing his cuts, while demanding explanation. Luke tells her everything. Owen's betrayal, the Hegemony's ambush, the journal's contents. The journal's crucial because Richard documented not just the fountain's location, but its nature. He'd gotten further than anyone knew, actually found the final key's location before deciding not to retrieve it. The third key is in a submerged tomb in an undisclosed location that the journal identifies only as where the river meets the sand. But Richard also documented the Hegemony's interest, their belief that the fountain could be controlled, weaponized, sold to the highest bidder. Charlotte shares her discovery from the museum photographs, the riddle about the Guardian's tomb. Cross-referenced with their father's journal, there's only one location that fits: a recently discovered underwater pyramid in the Red Sea region, archaeological sensation that's been kept quiet due to political instability in the area. That's where the third key waits. But they're outgunned and out-resourced. The hegemony has Owen, has funding, has a head start on planning. Luke and Charlotte are two academics with some stolen photographs in a dead man's journal. They need an ally, someone with resources who might have different motivations. They call Esme. She meets them at dawn in a Southwark safe house, listens to their situation, and makes a calculation visible on Gonzalez's face. Her employers, she finally reveals, they're a coalition of archaeological preservation societies. Want the fountain documented, not exploited. If the hegemony reaches it first, it disappears into private collection, or worse, gets destroyed in attempts to replicate its properties. Esme can get them to the pyramid. Her people have been monitoring the site, waiting for the right moment to investigate. But going means committing fully. No going back to Boston, no custody hearing, no normal life until this resolves. Charlotte's already made that choice at the airport, but hearing it stated plainly hits different. There's a scene where Charlotte calls Zoe, tries to explain why Mommy won't be at the hearing. Portman plays it with her back to camera, voice cracking, and we don't hear Zoe's response, just Charlotte's, I know, I promised. But your uncle needs me right now, and I think Grandpa needed me to finish this. It's the first time she's admitted their father might have been onto something worth pursuing. Luke overhears, and after she hangs up, there's a moment of acknowledgement. He tells her they can stop. Go back. Choose differently than their dad did. Charlotte shakes her head. They're too deep now, and besides, someone has to make sure the fountain doesn't become a commodity. If immortality is real, and comes with that curse, the world needs to know what it costs before someone tries to market it. The preparation montage shows Esme's resources diving equipment, intelligence briefings on hegemony movements. Owen and his team are already en route to the pyramid. The window's closing. Luke and Charlotte have maybe 24 hours before the hegemony secures the site. On the flight to the Red Sea, Charlotte translates more of the museum tablet, finding details about the fountain's mechanism. It's not magical in the supernatural sense. It's biological something in the water's mineral composition that arrests cellular aging but requires psychological isolation to function. Human bonding, love, connection. These produce hormonal responses that counteract the immortality effect. To live forever, you must sever all emotional ties. The curse isn't punishment, it's biochemistry. Luke processes this with visible discomfort. Their father understood this, spent years researching it, and apparently concluded that immortality under these conditions wasn't worth pursuing. But he never published his findings, never warned anyone. Why? Charlotte has a theory, one she voices hesitantly. Maybe Richard wanted to give people the choice. Maybe he believed that discovering the fountain's existence and its cost was something humanity needed to confront, not have decided for them by one researcher. It's either profoundly philosophical or deeply irresponsible, depending on perspective. The act closes with their arrival at the dive site, a research vessel positioned above the underwater pyramid. Esme's people have secured temporary access, but hegemony boats are visible on the horizon. This is happening now, ready or not. Luke and Charlotte suit up for the dive, and there's a moment before they descend where they acknowledge the stakes. If they find the fountain, if it's real and works, they'll be faced with the same choice that haunted their father, knowing immortality exists and choosing whether to use it. Charlotte asks if Luke would drink if given the option. His answer surprises her. Not anymore. Used to think living forever would give me time to figure things out. Now I know some things aren't supposed to be figured out. They're supposed to be felt. Charlotte doesn't respond verbally, just squeezes his shoulder, and they descend into blue darkness toward a structure that shouldn't exist, carrying questions their father died without answering. Act 2 has done its work, escalated stakes, revealed betrayals, deepened character relationships, and moved our protagonist to the threshold of the final confrontation. Now comes the reckoning. The pyramid reveals itself gradually through murky water, edges too precise to be natural formation, surfaces carved with glyphs that predate any known civilization in this region. Ritchie abandons his usual frenetic cutting here, letting the descent play in long takes that build dread rather than excitement. This isn't an adventure anymore. It's a pilgrimage to something that might be better left undiscovered. Luke and Charlotte enter through an opening that's clearly deliberate, sized for human passage, and their lights reveal a corridor sloping downward into the pyramid's heart. The architecture defies logic. This structure's been underwater for centuries, maybe millennia, yet the interior remains dry, some mechanism still functioning to keep the ocean at bay. Charlotte's scientific brain rejects this, even as she's experiencing it. Luke just keeps swimming deeper, drawn by the same compulsion that drove their father. They surface inside an air pocket chamber, a vast space with walls covered floor to ceiling in inscriptions. The third key sits on a pedestal, in the chamber's center, a crystal formation that pulses with faint bioluminescence, but they're not alone. Owen's already here, hegemony divers positioned around the chamber, and Gleason's smile has none of the friendly warmth from before. He congratulates them on leading the hegemony to the final location. Every photograph Charlotte took, every translation she completed, every step they thought they were choosing, orchestrated. The hegemony's been using them as bloodhounds, following Richard Truman's research through his children, because they go places and take risks the organization couldn't. Charlotte's rage is cold, controlled, more dangerous than Luke's hot fury. She tells Owen he's fundamentally misunderstood what the fountain is. It's not a treasure to possess. It's a test designed to expose exactly the kind of greed he's demonstrating. Owen's response reveals the hegemony's true purpose. They know about the curse, understand the isolation immortality requires, and believe they can engineer around it. Create controlled environments where immortals can exist without emotional connections, sustained by purpose rather than love. It's a horrifying vision, immortality, as imprisonment. Eternal life stripped of everything that makes existence meaningful. Luke calls it what it is, psychopathy, with a business model. But Owen counters that it's evolution. Humanity's held back by attachment, by the fear of loss. Offer people the choice between love and eternity, and you'd be surprised how many choose eternity. Before the philosophical debate can escalate, Esme and her team breach the chamber from another entrance. The standoff becomes three-way hegemony operatives, preservation coalition forces, and Luke and Charlotte caught between them. Gonzalez plays Esme's entrance with weary inevitability, like she knew it would come to this, but hoped it wouldn't. Her proposition is simple: destroy the fountain, document its existence for historical record, then collapse the pyramid and ensure no one can use it. Owen argues that's vandalism of an irreplaceable archaeological site. Esme counters that some discoveries are too dangerous for humanity's current maturity level. Maybe in 1,000 years, we'd be ready for immortality. Right now, we'd weaponize it within a decade. Luke and Charlotte exchange glances, a whole conversation happening in silence. They've spent this entire journey arguing about their father's choices, his priorities, his legacy. Now they're facing the exact dilemma that consumed his final years. What do you do when you find something real and terrible? The decision gets taken from them when Owen makes a play for the third key. His operatives open fire, and the chamber erupts into chaos. Ritchie returns to his kinetic style here, but it's underwater-influenced movements, slowed by dive gear, bullets creating trails of bubbles, the fight choreographed around the chamber's pillars, and the need to protect air tanks. Luke engages Owen directly while Charlotte goes for the key. She reaches it first, and the moment her hand touches the crystal, the chamber's inscriptions begin to glow. Not metaphorically actual bioluminescence, spreading through the glyphs like circuitry activating. And Charlotte understands. The pyramid isn't a tomb. It's a mechanism, and the 3 keys are the activation sequence. A doorway opens in the chamber's far wall, revealing a passage descending further into darkness. This is it, the actual location of the fountain. Everything else just security measures designed to test worthiness. Owen sees it too, and redoubles his efforts to reach the passage. Esme's team tries to block him, but the hegemony came prepared for resistance. In the chaos, Luke makes a choice. He grabs Charlotte and they run for the passage, leaving both factions fighting behind them. It's pure instinct: get to the fountain first, worry about what to do with it after. Charlotte protests that this is exactly their father's mistake, charging forward without considering consequences. Luke's breathless response: then we'll make different choices than he did. The passage leads to a natural cavern, and here the film shifts into genuine wonder. The fountain isn't a fountain at all. It's a pool, fed by an underground spring, surrounded by formations that catch and reflect light in impossible ways. The water glows with the same bioluminescence as the inscriptions, and the air tastes electric, charged with something Charlotte's scientific training has no framework to explain. They approach slowly, reverently, and Charlotte kneels to test the water. Her equipment confirms its chemically anomalous mineral compositions that shouldn't coexist, cellular samples showing 0 degradation even after hours of exposure. It's real. The Fountain of Youth exists, and it works exactly as the legends claimed. Luke asks the question that's been building since Thailand: did Dad drink from it? Charlotte checks her father's journal, and there's an entry dated 6 months before his death. Richard found this place, stood where they're standing, and chose to walk away. His reasoning is documented. To drink is to choose eternity over love, existence over meaning. I cannot imagine a loneliness so profound, and I will not inflict that knowledge on the world until the world is ready to choose wisely. But he left the research intact, the trail discoverable, because he believed his children deserved to make their own choice. That's why he never published warnings or destroyed his notes. He was giving Luke and Charlotte the same agency he exercised, the opportunity to face immortality and decide if it was worth the cost. Charlotte starts crying, and Portman plays it with gut-wrenching restraint. Their father wasn't neglectful because he didn't care. He was distant because he'd seen something that fundamentally altered his understanding of human connection, and he didn't know how to be close to people he knew he'd eventually lose. His obsession wasn't ambition. It was a form of mourning for a choice he'd already made. Luke understands something else. Their dad left this for them as a test and a gift. If they're willing to chase the fountain despite knowing the curse, they deserve the choice. But if they can walk away, they prove they've learned what took Richard decades to understand: that connection matters more than duration. Owen and his operatives burst into the cavern, weapons drawn. He demands they step away from the fountain. Luke's response is to pull out the vial he's been carrying, a water sample they collected from the Thai dive. One of the 3 keys, the only physical piece they still possess. He dangles it over the pool and threatens to contaminate the fountain with foreign elements, potentially destroying its unique properties. It's a bluff. Charlotte's not even sure that would work, but Owen doesn't know that. Gleason's face contorts with calculation, weighing the risk of calling Luke's play against the certainty of losing everything if he's not bluffing. In that moment of hesitation, Esme's team catches up, and now everyone's gathered around the fountain, armed and volatile. Esme gives Luke and Charlotte one last option. Leave now, let her people collapse the pyramid, ensure no one gets immortality. Owen counters with his offer. Hegemony protection, unlimited resources, the chance to study the fountain safely. Both sides want to use the siblings to legitimize their choice. Charlotte looks at Luke, really looks at him, seeing not the reckless kid brother, but the man who's been trying to understand their father through this entire quest. She asks him what he wants to do. Luke's answer comes slowly, worked out as he speaks. I wanted this to matter. Dad's work, his sacrifice, all of it. I thought finding the fountain would prove it was worth what we lost. But standing here, I realize we didn't lose him to the fountain, we lost him to the fear of losing us. It's the insight that unlocks everything. Richard didn't drink from the fountain, but he let the knowledge of it poison his relationships anyway. He became so afraid of attachment, knowing its impermanence, that he created the very isolation the curse would have imposed. The tragedy wasn't the fountain. It was choosing loneliness preemptively. Charlotte completes the thought, so we choose differently. We choose connection, even knowing it ends. Especially knowing it ends. She turns to Owen and delivers the killing blow to his philosophy. If immortality requires severing all bonds, then it's already worthless. The hegemony is trying to package and sell something that defeats its own purpose. Luke takes the third key, the crystal Charlotte retrieved, and throws it into the fountain. The water's glow intensifies briefly, then fades to ordinary darkness. Whatever mechanism the keys activated, the sequence is broken now. Charlotte adds her water samples, contaminating the pool deliberately, and tells Esme to bring down the pyramid. Owen's scream of rage is genuine, years of planning and resources evaporating in seconds. He lunges for the pool, desperate to salvage something, but Luke intercepts him. The fight's brief and vicious, ending when Charlotte uses a piece of cave formation to knock Owen unconscious. Krasinski and Portman's teamwork in this moment is seamless. They finally synced up, operating as the unit they were always capable of becoming. Esme's demolition team sets charges while everyone evacuates. The swim back to the surface feels endless. Luke and Charlotte ascending through blue darkness with the pyramid crumbling beneath them, centuries of secrets returning to ocean floor where maybe they belong. They breach to sunlight and immediately get extracted by Esme's vessel, putting distance between them and the dive site. On deck, watching the water where the pyramid was, Charlotte asks Esme what her coalition will do with their documentation. Esme's answer is carefully political. They'll preserve the research, maintain records, but release nothing publicly for now. The world isn't ready for proof of immortality, even immortality with catastrophic conditions. Maybe someday. Not today. Not today. Luke should object. His whole journey was about validating their father's work, making the sacrifice meaningful. But he doesn't. He just nods, accepting that some knowledge needs gatekeeping. And that's okay. Charlotte squeezes his hand, and they stand together watching the horizon. Two people who finally stopped running from their father's shadow. The epilogue comes months later. Charlotte's back in Boston, and she's lost primary custody. The missed hearing cost her exactly what she feared. But she has visitation rights, and the film shows her with Zoe at a park, present in a way she wasn't before. She's learned the lesson the fountain taught. Time's value isn't measured in quantity, but in attention. Luke's teaching, adjunct position at Boston University, finally using his expertise legitimately. He and Charlotte meet for weekly dinners, rebuilding their relationship with intention rather than obligation. They don't talk about the fountain, don't process the adventure publicly. It's just theirs, a shared experience that redefined their understanding of family. The film's final scene takes place at their father's grave. Luke and Charlotte stand together, and Luke finally says what he's been carrying. I get it now. Why you kept searching even after you knew. You wanted us to have the choice. Make it consciously. Thanks for that. And sorry it took us so long to understand. Charlotte adds her own goodbye, simpler and more devastating. We chose each other, Dad. We chose love. Hope that's what you wanted. The camera pulls back. leaving them there. And Ritchie ends not with spectacle, but with quiet two people at peace with impermanence, having refused immortality in favor of something rarer. The final shot is their father's journal, closed on Charlotte's desk next to a photo of all three of them from childhood. The fountain's location died with the pyramid, Richard's research archived but incomplete, and that's exactly how it should be. Some treasures aren't meant to be claimed. Some quests are about the journey, revealing who you are, not what you find at the end. Fountain of Youth closes having delivered on its adventure promise while transcending the genre. It's a heist film about stealing nothing, an action movie where the real victory is walking away, a family drama disguised as globe-trotting spectacle. Guy Ritchie's crafted something slippery and substantial, entertaining and thoughtful, loud and quietly devastating. The fountain was real. The choice was genuine, and Luke and Charlotte Truman chose mortality, connection, and each other. In a world obsessed with extending life, that might be the most radical treasure of all. Character-driven adventure films live or die on whether we believe the people at their center, and Fountain of Youth succeeds because its characters feel lived in rather than constructed. Luke and Charlotte Truman are hero archetypes dropped into an adventure framework. They're damaged adults using treasure hunting as therapy, which makes their journey compelling in ways pure spectacle never could. Luke Truman. The charming wreckage, John Krasinski's Luke, is introduced stealing artifacts in Istanbul, but the film's smart enough to show us the mess underneath the charm within minutes. He's 34, speaks 5 languages, and has been arrested in 4 countries. A resume that sounds exciting until you realize it's also the profile of someone running from stability. Krasinski plays Luke with a specific kind of desperate energy, the guy at the party who's fascinating for 2 hours and exhausting for 2 days. What makes the performance work is how Krasinski layers Luke's recklessness with genuine competence. When he's decoding their father's clues or navigating a Thai black market, you see someone who's genuinely skilled at this lifestyle. But in quieter moments, when Charlotte questions his choices, or when he's alone with Richard's journals, the confidence cracks and you see the frightened kid still seeking approval from a ghost. Luke's central wound is abandonment disguised as independence. Richard wasn't physically absent. He was present, but distracted. In the room, but mentally, thousands of miles away, chasing legends. That's worse in some ways than clean absence. It taught Luke that love is something you have to earn through achievement, and he's been chasing achievements ever since, never quite believing he's done enough. The Thailand sequence establishes Luke's operating mode. Charm first, improvise second. Apologize never, when he talks their way past Narung's security, or flirts with the speedboat rental agent. Krasinski makes it look effortless. But watch his eyes during the museum. Escape, there's calculation happening. Constant risk assessment. The mental math of someone who survived on instinct for years. His relationship with Charlotte is the film's emotional engine, and Krasinski navigates it with lived-in specificity. These aren't siblings who drifted apart naturally. They were separated by ideology. Luke chose to continue their father's work, while Charlotte rejected it. And that philosophical divide calcified into years of silence. When they argue, Krasinski doesn't play it as simple anger. There's hurt underneath, the specific pain of being misunderstood by someone who should know you better than anyone. The custody hearing fight in London reveals Luke's deepest flaw. He genuinely doesn't understand why Charlotte would choose her daughter over the quest. Not because he's callous, but because he's so conditioned to prioritize discovery over relationship that he can't imagine making the opposite choice. Krasinski plays the argument with increasing desperation, like Luke's watching his sister make their father's mistakes and can't make her see it. But the character's arc isn't about Luke learning to be responsible in some Disney movie way. It's about him recognizing that his father's distance wasn't about Luke being insufficient, it was about Richard being afraid. That realization comes in pieces throughout the film, but the moment it crystallizes is in the pyramid's final chamber, when Luke reads Richard's journal entry about choosing to walk away. Krasinski's face, in that moment, does extraordinary work. You see Luke processing years of inadequacy, understanding that the problem was never his worthiness. His father loved him enough to be terrified of losing him, and that fear manifested as emotional distance. It's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. And Luke's entire quest for validation dissolves because he finally understands the question was wrong. The choice to destroy the fountain, rather than claim it, represents Luke's graduation from his father's shadow. Richard spent years agonizing over what to do with the discovery. Luke makes the decision in seconds, not because he's impulsive, but because he's learned what his father took decades to understand. Some things aren't worth the cost, and immortality without connection is just elaborate suicide. Krasinski brings unexpected depth to what could have been a standard charming rogue role. As Luke is funny without being jokey, competent without being infallible, damaged without being maudlin. The physicality helps. Krasinski clearly did significant stunt training, and Luke's movement through action sequences reads as someone comfortable with danger rather than someone pretending to be. Charlotte Truman, control as survival mechanism. Natalie Portman's Charlotte is Luke's perfect inverse, where he runs toward chaos. She builds walls against it. First appearance in that Boston courtroom shows us everything we need to know. Impeccably dressed, perfectly prepared, and losing anyway because you can't control other people's perceptions, no matter how hard you try. Portman plays Charlotte as someone who's built an entire personality around never becoming her father, and the irony is that obsessive self-control is just Richard's obsession inverted. She's a brilliant archaeologist who refuses to pursue fieldwork, choosing instead to authenticate others' discoveries from the safety of university laboratories. It's professionally limiting and psychologically revealing. Charlotte's so afraid of her father's recklessness that she's overcorrected into paralysis. The custody battle isn't just plot mechanics. It's Charlotte's entire worldview under assault. She's trying to prove she's a stable, present parent, everything Richard wasn't, and her ex-husband's using her father's reputation against her. The suggestion that Charlotte might prioritize work over family cuts deep, because it's her worst fear about herself, the genetic inheritance she spent adulthood trying to reprogram. When Luke shows up with his Thai tablet photographs, Charlotte's initial refusal isn't about lack of interest. Portman lets us see the fascination in her eyes, even as she's declining. She wants to engage with the puzzle. Her brain's already working on the glyphs, but she's terrified that saying yes means admitting she's her father's daughter. The moment she agrees to authenticate is a small surrender, the first crack in her carefully constructed defenses. Portman's performance shines in how she differentiates Charlotte's professional competence from her emotional fragility. In the British Museum, examining the tablet with academic precision, Charlotte's completely in control. But in hotel rooms after near-death experiences, when adrenaline crashes and the implications sink in, Portman lets the facade crumble. These aren't dramatic breakdowns. They're small moments of overwhelm quickly suppressed, which feels more true to someone who spent years not allowing herself vulnerability. The relationship between Charlotte and Luke is beautifully calibrated by both actors. They have sibling shorthand, finishing each other's sentences about archaeological details, referencing shared childhood memories, but also years of resentment, creating conversational landmines. When Charlotte snaps at Luke for being reckless, there's genuine fear underneath the criticism. She's already lost her father to obsession. She can't lose her brother, too. Charlotte's arc involves learning that control is an illusion, and that's okay. The turning point comes at Heathrow when she chooses to miss her custody hearing. Portman plays it with visible physical pain, Charlotte literally turning away from the gate, each step toward Luke's coordinates, a step away from the life she's tried to build. It's not an impulsive decision. We see her calculating, weighing, choosing, which makes it more powerful. She's not being swept up in adventure. She's deliberately prioritizing her brother over her custody case, knowing exactly what it costs. That choice doesn't mean Charlotte becomes reckless, like Luke. In the final pyramid confrontation, she's still the one thinking 3 steps ahead, calculating Owen's position and planning exits. But she's learned to act despite imperfect information, to trust relationships over rigid planning. When she contaminates the fountain's water, it's a controlled decision to embrace uncertainty. Charlotte choosing connection over the false security of immortality. The epilogue's most devastating because Charlotte loses the custody battle. The film doesn't give her a reward for choosing family. She made the choice and suffered the consequence. But Portman plays the park scene with Zoe with a presence that wasn't there before. Charlotte's lost primary custody but gained something her father never had, the ability to be fully present in the time she does have. It's not a happy ending. It's a mature one. Owen Carver, Banality of Institutional Evil. Domhnall Gleeson's. Owen could have been a simple villain, but the performance is more insidious than that. He's introduced as Charlotte's bumbling colleague, helpful to the point of being annoying, and Gleeson commits fully to the bit. The early Thailand scenes feature Owen asking obvious questions, getting in the way during action sequences, and generally reading as comic relief. But Gleeson seeds small moments that don't quite fit. The way Owen's eyes track Charlotte when she's not looking. How his helpful suggestions always move the quest forward, rather than slowing it down. His remarkably specific knowledge about archaeological sites that should be outside his expertise. Gleeson plays these moments so subtly that you don't notice them on first viewing, but they're there, building an alternate reading of the character. The reveal at Blackwood Manor works because Gleeson completely shifts his performance. The bumbling physical comedy disappears, replaced by clinical efficiency. His voice drops half an octave, losing the nervous uptalk. Even his posture changes. Owen stops making himself smaller and stands with the confidence of someone who's been in control the entire time. It's genuinely unsettling, and Gleeson makes the transformation feel like removing a mask rather than becoming someone new. What makes Owen effective as an antagonist is that he's not wrong exactly. His argument about the fountain, that immortality could advance human knowledge, that attachment is limiting, that evolution requires sacrifice, has internal logic. Gleeson plays Owen as a true believer, not a mercenary. He genuinely thinks the hegemony's vision represents progress, which makes him more dangerous than someone motivated by simple greed. The final confrontation in the pyramid lets Gleeson drop any pretense of reasonableness. Owen's desperation when Luke threatens to destroy the fountain is raw and ugly. This isn't about advancement anymore. It's about personal investment and sunk cost. Gleeson makes Owen pathetic in those final moments, a middle management villain whose ideology collapses under pressure, and there's something darkly appropriate about that. Esme. Opacity is strength. Isa Gonzalez has the hardest job in the film. Play a character whose motivations remain deliberately unclear for 2 hours, and she navigates it with impressive control. Esme appears and disappears throughout the narrative, always precisely when needed, and Gonzalez plays her with the watchful stillness of someone who knows more than she's revealing. The character could be purely functional, but Gonzalez finds shading in the limited material. Esme's not emotionless. Watch her face when Luke and Charlotte argue, or when Owen makes his pitch for the hegemony's vision. There's judgment happening, moral calculations, but Gonzalez keeps it internal. We know Esme has opinions. We're just not sure what they are until she's ready to share. The Preservation Coalition reveal recontextualizes Esme's earlier actions without making them feel like a cheat. Gonzalez has been playing Esme as genuinely protective of Luke and Charlotte from the beginning, not because she cares about them personally, but because they're useful for her goals. It's a mercenary kind of care, but it's still real, and Gonzalez never lets us forget that Esme's operating from institutional logic rather than individual affection. The film wisely doesn't give Esme a full arc or backstory. She remains somewhat enigmatic at the end, and that's appropriate. Not every character needs complete explanation. Sometimes opacity is its own form of characterization, and Gonzalez makes Esme compelling precisely because we never fully understand her. The sibling dynamic, 2 halves of a broken whole. The film's real achievement is making Luke and Charlotte's relationship feel authentically complicated. They love each other and resent each other and need each other and can't stand each other, often simultaneously. Krasinski and Portman have genuine chemistry, the kind that reads as years of shared history rather than actors meeting on set. Watch how they communicate in crisis situations. Minimal dialogue, pure body language and shared context. The underwater pyramid dive where Charlotte's equipment malfunctions and Luke helps without being asked. Their movements synchronized from childhood practice. Or the London fight where they argue about custody while simultaneously decoding glyphs. their brains working in parallel even as their hearts are at odds. The film earns its emotional resolution because it doesn't rush the reconciliation. Luke and Charlotte don't hug it out and suddenly trust each other. They slowly, painfully learn to operate as a team, backsliding into old patterns and having to consciously correct. The final choice, to destroy the fountain, works because it's the first major decision they make together, fully aligned, each respecting what the other brings to the reasoning. By the epilogue, their weekly dinners aren't about grand gestures. They're about two people committing to regular contact, building relationship through consistency rather than intensity. It's unglamorous and deeply true, the hard work of family maintenance that their father never did, and they're determined to do differently. Fountain of Youth understands that adventure films work best when character drives plot rather than plot happening to characters. Luke and Charlotte don't just experience events, they make choices that reveal who they are. And those choices have consequences that shape who they become. That's what elevates this beyond formulaic treasure hunting into something with a genuine emotional resonance. The performances sell it. Krasinski and Portman doing career-best work in roles that could have been thankless. Gleason making villainy banal and therefore believable. Gonzalez creating presence through withholding. These aren't people, they're fully realized characters who exist beyond the frame. And that's the difference between good adventure films and great ones. Guy Ritchie's built a career on kinetic energy and controlled chaos. But Fountain of Youth represents something new in his filmography, applying that signature style to globe-trotting adventure rather than criminal underworlds. The technical challenge is maintaining his visual identity while serving a genre that demands different rhythms, less focused on clever schemes and more on discovery, danger, and escalating stakes. The result is Ritchie's most visually restrained work that still feels unmistakably his. Ritchie's visual grammar goes global. The opening Istanbul sequence establishes the template. When we first meet Luke breaking into the private collection, Ritchie uses his trademark freeze-frame introduction Luke, mid-climb, screen text overlaying stats and skills. But the cinematography by likely cinematographer working with Ritchie captures the Turkish location with saturated oranges and deep blues that feel specific to the setting rather than generic action movie color grading. The camera follows Luke with roaming Steadicam, anticipating his movements with the same fluidity Ritchie brought to Sherlock Holmes's fight sequences. But here, it's navigating architectural spaces rather than boxing rings. What's immediately apparent is how Ritchie modulates his usual pace for adventure storytelling. His gangster films thrive on rapid-fire cutting, scenes that slam into each other with percussive intensity. Fountain of Youth still moves quickly, but there's breathing room built into sequences that allow for genuine wonder. When the siblings first see the underwater pyramid, Ritchie holds shots longer than his usual half-second cuts, letting the scale and impossibility of the structure register before accelerating into action. The film's visual approach divides cleanly between action sequences and investigation sequences, each with distinct technical strategies. During quieter moments, Charlotte examining artifacts, Luke studying their father's journals. The camera settles into classical shot-reverse shot dialogue coverage with occasional slow pushes that build tension through patience rather than kinetics. But the moment danger arrives, Ritchie unleashes his full stylistic arsenal. Whip pans that feel almost violent, crash zooms on crucial details, and editing patterns that fragment space into puzzle pieces the viewer has to assemble. Thailand, organized chaos in paradise. The Thailand section showcases Ritchie's gift for location-specific action geography. The escape from Narang's estate uses the Chiang Mai landscape not just as backdrop, but as active participant in the sequence. The camera captures narrow alleyways between buildings, floating market stalls that provide cover and obstacles, temple complexes with multiple levels that turn pursuit into three-dimensional chess. The speedboat chase that opens the film is Ritchie operating in pure kinetic mode. He shoots it with multiple cameras at varying frame rates, allowing him to speed ramp between slow-motion bullet impacts and real-time maneuvering. The cutting pattern interleaves shots of pursuers and pursued with extreme close-ups of Charlotte's hands on the throttle, Luke's face as he returns fire, and wide establishing shots that show the tactical situation. It's controlled chaos, the action always geographically coherent, even when the editing creates sensory overload. What makes it work technically is the decision to shoot practically. These are real boats on real water, actual stunt performers doing genuinely dangerous work, and the camera captures it with documentary immediacy. Ritchie's fought against over-reliance on CGI throughout his career, and here that preference serves the adventure genre perfectly. When Luke and Charlotte crash through market stalls or leap between vessels, the impacts have weight that digital fakery can't replicate. The sound design in these sequences does critical work. The boat's engines create a bass-heavy drone that underlies the entire chase, punctuated by bullet impacts that crack through the mix with visceral sharpness. The music, likely incorporating traditional Thai instruments into a modern action score, provides rhythmic drive without overwhelming the natural sounds of water, wind, and chaos. It's a careful balance between scored and source audio that keeps the sequence grounded, even as it accelerates into implausibility. London, Ritchie's home territory reimagined. The British Museum sequence reveals how Ritchie adapts his London familiarity to adventure frameworks. He shot the city extensively in previous films, but always through the lens of criminal enterprise. Here, he's working with tourist landmarks and academic institutions, which requires different visual strategies. The museum infiltration plays like a heist, even though they're not technically stealing anything. Ritchie shoots the approach with the same careful staging he brought to Snatch, establishing shots showing guard positions, close-ups of security cameras, Charlotte's nervous glances as she requests special access. The editing creates tension through cross-cutting, Charlotte examining the tablet intercut with Luke creating distractions, Owen running interference, security growing suspicious. What's technically clever is how Ritchie uses the museum's architecture. The vast halls with high ceilings allow for compositional depth, foreground characters interacting while background guards patrol at different focal planes. It creates paranoia visually, the constant awareness that they're being watched even when authority figures aren't in frame. The lighting in these sequences skews cooler than the Thailand section, grays and whites that feel institutional and constraining, contrasting sharply with the tropical saturation earlier. The Blackwood Manor betrayal scene represents Ritchie's most classical filmmaking in the entire movie. The fight between Luke and Owen's operatives uses the Victorian studies, furniture, and architecture as weapons and obstacles. Ritchie stages it with clarity, unusual for modern action. You always know where characters are spatially, which matters because Luke's winning through environmental awareness rather than superior fighting skill. The editing during this fight is rhythmic but not frenetic. Shots hold long enough to appreciate the stunt choreography, Luke using a desk as a springboard, grabbing a fireplace poker as improvised weapon, timing a window crash to coincide with an opponent's charge. Ritchie's always been excellent at fight geography, making sure the audience understands the space and stakes, and here he's applying that skill to desperate escape rather than methodical beatdown. Underwater, stillness as spectacle. The underwater sequences represent Ritchie's most significant stylistic departure. His usual rapid cutting is impossible when shooting dive sequences. The physics of movement underwater demands different rhythms, so he adapts, finding ways to maintain tension through composition and sound design rather than editing pace. The descent to the first underwater structure uses negative space brilliantly. Luke and Charlotte are tiny figures in vast blue darkness, lights from their equipment, creating small pools of visibility in surrounding murk. The camera follows them in long, unbroken takes that build claustrophobia despite the open ocean. You're always aware of how much water is above them, how much pressure, how vulnerable they are. Ritchie shoots the interior of these submerged structures with an almost horror film aesthetic. The glyphs on walls are revealed gradually as lights pass over them, creating the sense of hidden knowledge being uncovered. The color palette shifts from blue ocean to greenish bioluminescence, an unnatural glow that suggests something beyond normal archaeological discovery. The sound design here is crucial, removing all natural audio and replacing it with breathing, equipment hum, and occasional creaks of ancient structures under ocean pressure creates profound unease. The action beat, when Owen's equipment malfunctions, demonstrates how Ritchie adapts his style to underwater constraints. He can't quick cut here, visibility and movement are too limited. Instead, he creates tension through the soundtrack, increasingly desperate breathing, close-ups on gauges showing depleting oxygen, and the physical struggle of Charlotte and Luke helping Owen to the surface. It's some of the film's most technically accomplished work, precisely because it requires restraint. The Pyramid, ancient mystery meets modern filmmaking. The final pyramid location is where production design and cinematography converge to create genuine awe. This needed to feel ancient, impossible, and slightly wrong, a structure that shouldn't exist where it does. The production design team, names unlisted in available materials, apparently combined practical sets for interior chambers with location shooting at actual archaeological sites, creating composite environments that feel photographically real. The pyramid's exterior establishes scale through composition. Wide shots show the structure's full scope underwater, too geometrically perfect to be natural formation. The camera emphasizes its angles, using them to create unsettling visual compositions where the pyramid's edges cut across frame in ways that feel architecturally aggressive. It's beautiful and threatening simultaneously. Inside, Ritchie returns to kinetic mode for the three-way standoff between hegemony forces, Esme's coalition, and the Siblings. The firefight in the air pocket chamber uses the space's pillars and carved walls to create tactical complexity. He shoots it with handheld urgency, the camera participating in the chaos rather than observing from safety. Muzzle flashes illuminate glyphs that seem to glow in response, whether actually bioluminescent or just catching light. The effect is eerie and elevates the action beyond standard shootout. The passage to the actual fountain location represents a tonal shift that Ritchie handles with surprising delicacy. The frenetic energy drains away, replaced by careful, almost reverential cinematography. The camera precedes Luke and Charlotte down the passage, revealing the cavern gradually. The fountain itself is shot to emphasize its otherworldly beauty, reflections on water, creating doubled images, light sources unclear, everything slightly out of focus at the edges like a dream or hallucination. This is where Ritchie's restraint pays off dramatically. A more conventional director might score this heavily, use sweeping camera moves, really sell the moment. Ritchie instead goes quiet, minimal music, natural sound of dripping water and breathing, slow zooms rather than dramatic pushes. The effect is profound calm that contrasts sharply with the violence and chaos preceding it. You understand why Richard Truman was changed by finding this place. The cinematography does what dialogue couldn't, conveys genuine transcendence. Editing, rhythm as narrative tool. The film's editor name not specified in materials, deserves particular attention for how it modulates pace across genres. Early Thailand sequences cut rapidly, establishing the adventure action tone. London sequences slow down, allowing for character beats and investigation. The final pyramid confrontation accelerates again, but with different rhythms, shorter action bursts, interspersed with longer emotional moments. What's technically sophisticated is how the editing creates distinct tempos for Luke and Charlotte. Luke's scenes tend toward faster cutting, his perspective presented as kinetic and reactive. Charlotte's scenes hold shots longer, her analytical mind requiring time to process. When they're together and in sync, the editing finds a middle rhythm that suggests collaboration. It's character work accomplished through technical means. The film also uses Ritchie's signature montage techniques, but applies them to exposition. When Charlotte explains ancient civilizations or Luke cross-references their father's research, these become visual sequences rather than static dialogue. Maps animate. Text scrolls across screen. Archival images blend with present-day footage. It's information delivery that maintains momentum, turning necessary backstory into kinetic experience. Sound design and score, genre fusion through audio. The soundtrack, composer unspecified in available research, represents a deliberate fusion of Ritchie's usual aesthetic with adventure film traditions. His previous films used contemporary music, diegetic sound as rhythm, and scores that emphasized percussion and electronics. Fountain of Youth incorporates those elements but adds orchestral swells and ethnic instrumentation appropriate to locations. Thailand sequences use traditional instruments woven into electronic beats, creating cultural specificity without feeling like tourism. London sequences are grayer sonically, more restrained, classical instruments dominating. The pyramid finale goes almost ambient, focusing on texture and space rather than melody. It's a score that adapts to narrative needs rather than imposing consistent tone. The sound design creates immersive environments that ground Ritchie's stylized visuals. The Thai floating markets buzz with vendor calls and crowd noise. The British Museum has the particular acoustic quality of vast spaces filled with whispered conversations. Underwater sequences emphasize isolation through muffled audio and equipment sounds. Each location sounds as specific as it looks, which sells the globe-trotting scope. Action choreography, practical over digital. Ritchie's commitment to practical stunts gives Fountain of Youth tactile authenticity. The speedboat chase used real vessels and performers, filmed with safety precautions, but capturing actual danger. The Blackwood Manor fight was apparently rehearsed extensively to allow longer takes and more complex choreography. Even the underwater sequences prioritized practical effects over CGI where possible. This commitment matters because adventure films live or die on whether we believe the danger. CGI allows filmmakers to visualize impossible scenarios, but often sacrifices visceral impact. Ritchie splits the difference using digital effects for compositing and enhancement, but building action on practical foundations. When Charlotte steers that speedboat through narrow passages, Portman's actually on a moving vessel, and the tension in her body language reads as authentic because it is. The film's technical craft ultimately serves character and theme. Ritchie's using his full stylistic tool, kinetic editing, practical action, location-specific cinematography, adaptive sound design, not as empty spectacle but as tools to explore sibling dynamics and mortality anxiety through adventure frameworks. The result is filmmaking that's showy without being hollow, technically accomplished without being sterile. Fountain of Youth proves Ritchie can work in genres beyond crime while maintaining his visual identity. The technical adaptation required slower pacing for investigation, restrained camera work for wonder. Practical commitment to action represents growth without abandoning what makes his work distinctive. It's craft in service of story, which is what technical excellence should be. Beneath the speedboat chases and underwater pyramids, Fountain of Youth is wrestling with questions that have haunted humanity since we became conscious enough to fear death. What would you trade for immortality? And if the cost is everything that makes life worth living, is the deal already poisoned? The film uses adventure genre mechanics to explore philosophical territory that heavier dramas often fumble, making existential dread entertaining without trivializing it. The paradox of eternal life. The fountain's curse is elegant in its cruelty: drink and live forever, but everyone you love dies while you persist. And worse, your capacity for love itself becomes toxic to your immortality. It's not just watching people age and die. That's the natural tragedy everyone faces. It's that forming bonds actively undermines the gift you've claimed. To maintain eternal life, you must remain eternally alone. This transforms immortality from ultimate prize to elaborate trap. The film suggests that our culture's obsession with longevity, anti-aging treatments, life extension research, the billion-dollar wellness industry, might be fundamentally misunderstanding what makes existence valuable. Duration without meaning is just extended waiting. The fountain literalizes this. You can have infinite time, but you'll spend it disconnected from everything that gives time significance. What's thematically sharp is how the film presents this, not as moral judgment, but as biological mechanism. Charlotte's research reveals the fountain works through biochemistry. The hormones produced by emotional bonding counteract a cellular preservation effect. It's not punishment for greed. It's just physics, which makes it scarier. You can't negotiate with chemistry. You can't earn an exception through virtue. The cost is absolute and impersonal. Richard Truman's life becomes a study in what happens when someone discovers this truth. He didn't drink from the fountain, but knowledge of it poisoned his relationships anyway. Knowing that love and connection are temporary, that everyone he cherished would eventually disappear, he preemptively distanced himself. He chose loneliness to avoid the pain of loss, which is just the fountain's curse, self-imposed. The tragedy is that Richard spent years trying to protect his children from a choice he'd already made for himself. By being emotionally absent, he inflicted a different version of the isolation the fountain would have caused. Luke and Charlotte grew up with a father physically present but psychologically elsewhere, which might be worse than clean absence. At least absence can be explained. Present but distant is just confusing. Rejection. Legacy. What we inherit from our parents. The film's deepest exploration centers on inheritance beyond genetics, the ideologies, traumas, and obsessions parents pass to children, whether intentionally or not. Luke inherits Richard's compulsive need to solve mysteries, but he's chasing validation rather than knowledge. Charlotte inherits Richard's capacity for intense focus, but she directs it toward control rather than discovery. Both are responding to the same absent father, just with opposite strategies. This creates a fascinating doubling effect, where Luke and Charlotte are simultaneously trying to understand their father and avoid becoming him. Luke pursues the fountain to finish Richard's work, believing completion equals approval. Charlotte refuses pursuit to prove she's different, believing distance equals safety. Neither strategy works because both are still defined by Richard, one through emulation, one through rejection. The film suggests that healthy inheritance requires conscious choice rather than reactive compliance or defiance. When Luke and Charlotte finally destroy the fountain, they're not following their father's example or rebelling against it. They're making an independent decision based on understanding both the discovery and the man who made it. That's maturity using parental legacy as information rather than instruction. Richard's journals become almost a character themselves, a final communication from beyond death. The fact that he documented everything but published nothing suggests he was writing for an audience of his children when they were ready. The quest he leaves them isn't about treasure. It's about understanding his choices by walking his path and reaching their own conclusions. There's something profound about how the film frames this as gift rather than burden. Richard could have destroyed his research, made the fountain unfindable. Instead, he preserved the trail, trusting Luke and Charlotte would be wiser than he was when they faced the choice. That's a particular kind of parental love, giving your children the autonomy to make mistakes you've already made, believing they'll learn what you couldn't teach directly. Connection over duration, quality versus quantity. The film's central thesis might be this: a finite life filled with genuine connection beats infinite life spent alone. It's not an original idea. Poets have been saying this for millennia, but Fountain of Youth earns it through narrative specificity rather than abstract philosophizing. Charlotte's custody battle literalizes this theme. She's fighting for limited time with Zoe weekends, summers, divided holidays. It's a fraction of the time she'd have with full custody, and losing the case means even less. But the film shows her learning to value that limited time more intensely, to be present in moments rather than distracted by plans. When she chooses Luke over the hearing, she's not abandoning Zoe. She's demonstrating the principles she's learning. Relationships matter more than structure, presence more than duration. Luke's arc moves in the same direction from different starting point. He begins the film treating relationships as background to achievement. He has contacts and acquaintances, but no real intimacy, because that would require staying still long enough to build it. His father's death forces confrontation with impermanence, and the quest becomes therapy disguised as treasure hunting. By choosing to destroy rather than claim the fountain, Luke's accepting that his time with people he loves will end, and that's what makes it precious. The film doesn't romanticize mortality or suggest death is good, actually. People die, and it's terrible. We see Charlotte grieving her father Luke, processing that loss through obsession, both damaged by absence, but it suggests that meaning emerges from limitation, that knowing something will end is what motivates us to appreciate it while it exists. Infinite time removes urgency, and urgency might be what creates value. There's also a subtle critique of how contemporary culture approaches mortality. The hegemony represents industries built on promising extended-life pharmaceutical companies, tech billionaires funding longevity research, wellness movements selling youth. Owen's pitch for immortality sounds uncomfortably like actual venture capital presentations. Optimize human experience by removing inefficient variables like emotional attachment. The film argues this isn't progress. It's sociopathy with spreadsheets. The ethics of refusing knowledge, one of the film's most interesting moral questions, is whether Luke and Charlotte are right to destroy the fountain rather than document and preserve it. Esme's coalition wants proof of immortality recorded for historical purposes. The Hebony wants it studied and potentially replicated. Luke and Charlotte choose obliteration, denying humanity access to potentially transformative knowledge. The film seems to endorse this choice, but it's worth examining the ethics. By destroying the fountain, they're making a decision for all of humanity, that we're not ready for immortality, that the cost is too high, that some discoveries should remain hidden. That's an enormous assumption of authority. Who are two people to decide what billions shouldn't know? Yet the film provides justification through the hegemony's existence. The fact that wealthy organizations are already positioned to monopolize and weaponize the fountain suggests what would happen if it became public knowledge. Immortality wouldn't be democratically distributed. It would be commodified, sold to the highest bidder, used as leverage and control. The fantasy isn't eternal life for everyone. It's eternal life for those who can afford it, while everyone else keeps dying. This connects to broader anxieties about technological advancement outpacing ethical frameworks. We've developed capabilities, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, nuclear weapons, before establishing societal wisdom, to use them responsibly. The fountain represents that pattern. Literalized, we could have immortality right now, but we'd absolutely abuse it. So maybe better to not have the option until we've matured as a species. Richard Truman apparently reached this conclusion decades earlier, which is why he researched but never published. His choice to leave the trail discoverable but incomplete suggests he believed future generations might be wiser, that his children specifically might make better choices than his own generation. Luke and Charlotte prove him both right and wrong. They find it and choose to destroy it, which is wiser than claiming it, but still paternalistic in denying others the choice. Sibling bonds as antidote to inherited trauma. The reconciliation between Luke and Charlotte operates as the film's emotional resolution because it represents breaking cycles their father perpetuated. Richard's obsession isolated him from his children. Luke and Charlotte's quest brings them together, using the same mythology that destroyed their family to rebuild it. That's thematically elegant. The poison becomes the cure through conscious recontextualization. Their arguments throughout the film aren't just plot friction. They're two people working out different trauma responses to the same childhood. Luke acts out, seeking extremity, because consistent abandonment taught him that normalcy doesn't get attention. Charlotte locks down, seeking control because chaos characterized her formative years. They're both coping mechanisms that worked in childhood, but calcify into personality disorders in adulthood. The quest forces them to communicate and compromise in ways they haven't since childhood. They have to trust each other's expertise, Luke's field experience, Charlotte's analytical skills, which means acknowledging the other person's value. That's harder than it sounds when you've spent years defining yourself in opposition to your sibling. But shared danger and shared purpose erode those defensive positions. By the end, they're not fixed or suddenly perfect siblings. The epilogue shows them maintaining relationship through effort, weekly dinners, deliberate contact. It's unglamorous and true. Real reconciliation isn't dramatic confrontation followed by hugging. It's consistent, small choices to stay connected, despite history suggesting you'll drift apart. They're choosing each other repeatedly, which is what their father never learned to do. Adventure as emotional archaeology. There's a metatextual layer, where the treasure hunt functions as excavation of family history. Luke and Charlotte are literally following their father's research, retracing his steps, discovering what he discovered. But they're also figuratively excavating their relationship with him. Each clue reveals not just the fountain's location, but Richard's thinking, his priorities, his choices. The film uses genre conventions to explore grief and understanding. Traditionally, adventure heroes seek treasure for glory or wealth. Luke and Charlotte are seeking comprehension. If they can understand what their father was chasing, maybe they can understand why he couldn't be present for them. The fountain, becomes less important than the journey's revelatory quality. This reframes the heist adventure structure as therapeutic process. Each location they visit, each puzzle they solve, each narrow escape these are stages of processing loss and complicated family dynamics. Thailand represents initial excitement and denial. London confronts them with direct evidence of their father's obsession. The pyramid forces final reckoning with who he was and who they are in relation to him. The decision to destroy the fountain is ultimately about breaking the obsession's hold. As long as it exists, someone will chase it, Luke. Other treasure hunters, organizations like the hegemony. By obliterating it, they're saying this stops here. This particular form of madness ends with us. That's conscious cycle breaking, the work of people who've examined inherited patterns and decided to terminate them. Mortality as meaning maker. The film's final philosophical position seems to be that death is what makes life cohere into narrative. Stories require endings. Infinite life would be infinite middle, endless accumulation of experience without shape or conclusion. We structure our lives around mortality, whether we acknowledge it or not. Career arcs, family building, legacy planning. Remove the endpoint and the structure collapses. Charlotte articulates this when explaining the fountain's mechanism to Luke. Human bonding creates hormonal responses that define our experience of meaning. Love, friendship, family, these aren't just pleasant additions to existence. They're what brains use to mark experiences as significant. The fountain's curse isn't arbitrary. It's removing the neurological basis for meaning itself. This suggests that immortality seekers are chasing something that undermines itself. They want eternal life because they fear missing out on experiences. But experiences only become meaningful through the emotional responses that the fountain's immortality would eliminate. You'd exist forever, but nothing would matter. That's not life extension. That's consciousness torture. The film doesn't moralize about this, it presents it as straightforward cost-benefit analysis. Here's what you gain: infinite time, no aging, no death. Here's what you lose: love, connection, the capacity to find anything meaningful. Run the numbers. Most people, when truly understanding the trade, would refuse. The hegemony represents the minority who take the deal anyway, which the film codes as pathological rather than visionary. Fountain of Youth uses adventure frameworks to smuggle in genuine philosophical inquiry about mortality, meaning, and what makes human life worth living. It doesn't pretend to have complete answers. The film's smart enough to know these are questions each generation has to answer for themselves. But it makes a compelling case that whatever immortality promises, the cost of absolute isolation makes it a transaction worth refusing. The themes land because they're embodied in character choices rather than stated in dialogue. Luke and Charlotte learn through experience what Richard learned through research, that living well matters more than living long, that meaning comes from connection despite its impermanence, and that some discoveries are tests of wisdom rather than prizes to claim. Those lessons, earned through 2 hours of escalating adventure, give the spectacle substance that elevates Fountain of Youth beyond its genre into something resonant and thoughtful. Fountain of Youth arrived in May 2025 to a theatrical landscape that had largely abandoned mid-budget star vehicles in favor of franchise tentpoles and low-budget genre experiments. Apple TV Plus's decision to release it directly to streaming rather than theaters positioned it as counter-programming to the summer blockbuster season adult-oriented adventure, with genuine stars, practical action, and thematic ambition that didn't require homework from previous installments. Critical reception. Respect with reservations. The film's reception landed in interesting territory. Critics acknowledged its craftsmanship and performances while questioning whether it fully committed to either its adventure spectacle or emotional depth. Screen Rant's review captured the ambivalence, praising the film's ambition while expressing frustration that it wasn't made better, suggesting the raw materials existed for something truly great that the execution didn't quite achieve. That tension between what the film is and what it could have been runs through much of the critical discourse. Ritchie's direction received praise for adapting his style to adventure frameworks, but some reviewers felt he was too restrained, that the film needed either more of his manic energy or complete abandonment of it, rather than the compromise approach he chose. The sibling dynamic between Krasinski and Portman was universally praised, but character development for supporting players like Esme drew criticism for feeling underwritten. The philosophical elements, the Fountain's Curse, the exploration of mortality and meaning earned respect from reviewers who appreciated adventure films tackling substantive themes. But some critics felt these ideas were presented rather than deeply explored, that the film gestured toward profundity without fully committing to the difficult conversations its premise raised. What's notable is the lack of consensus, which might be the film's most interesting critical legacy. Some reviewers positioned it as exactly what adventure cinema needs: intelligent, character-driven, thematically rich. Others saw it as neither fish nor fowl, too thoughtful for pure entertainment seekers and too conventional for art house audiences. That division suggests Fountain of Youth occupies genuinely liminal space in contemporary cinema, and maybe that's valuable even if it alienates portions of potential audiences. Guy Ritchie's evolving filmography. For Ritchie personally, Fountain of Youth represents continued evolution away from the London gangster films that made his name. His career trajectory shows a filmmaker deliberately pushing beyond his comfort zone, from Lock, Stock, and Snatch to the Sherlock Holmes franchise to live-action Disney adaptations to now globe-trotting adventure. What's consistent across these shifts is Ritchie's commitment to kinetic visual storytelling and ensemble dynamics. Even when working in radically different genres, his films feel recognizably his through editorial rhythm, camera movement, and how he stages character interactions. Fountain of Youth continues that pattern. It's clearly a Ritchie film in execution, even though it's operating in genre territory he hasn't previously explored. The question his recent work raises is whether Ritchie's style is adaptable to any genre or whether certain stories resist his approach. Fountain of Youth suggests the former. He successfully imports his aesthetic into adventure filmmaking without it feeling forced. But the critical ambivalence also suggests potential limits. Maybe some narratives require stylistic invisibility that Ritchie's directorial personality can't provide, or won't. His willingness to experiment deserves recognition regardless of individual film success. In an era where directors often get locked into franchise work or keep remaking the same film with different titles, Ritchie's pushing into new territory with each project. That's creatively healthy, even when results are mixed, and it positions him as a filmmaker still discovering what he's capable of, rather than coasting on proven formulas. Streaming's impact on adventure cinema. Fountain of Youth's streaming release, rather than theatrical run, raises questions about the future of mid-budget adventure films. The traditional theatrical model increasingly struggles to support films in this budget range. Too expensive to be profitable with modest returns, not spectacle-driven enough to compete with Marvel-style tentpoles. Streaming platforms theoretically offer solution by removing box office pressure and allowing films to find audiences over time rather than opening weekend. Apple TV Plus reportedly gave Ritchie significant creative freedom and budget to realize his vision, resources that might not have been available through traditional studio financing. The trade-off is reduced cultural impact. Streaming releases don't generate the collective viewing experience or sustained conversation that theatrical runs create. For viewers, the calculation shifts. Fountain of Youth works beautifully on home screens. The cinematography translates well to high-quality television. The pacing suits binge or episodic viewing, and the thematic content rewards attention that's easier to maintain at home than in theaters. But something's lost in the translation from communal experience to individual consumption, particularly for action sequences designed for immersive theatrical presentation. The film's commercial performance remains difficult to assess. Streaming platforms rarely release viewership data, and when they do, it's selectively curated to support marketing narratives. We don't know if Fountain of Youth was a hit by Apple TV Plus's internal metrics, which makes evaluating its impact beyond critical reception challenging. It exists in a quantum state where success and failure aren't clearly defined. Adventure genre in 2025, what's missing? What Fountain of Youth provides the adventure film as distinct genre has struggled for relevance in 21st century cinema. Indiana Jones defined the template in the 1980s. But subsequent decades saw those elements absorbed into superhero films, spy franchises, and YA adaptations. Pure treasure-hunting adventure, the kind Fountain of Youth attempts, became largely nostalgic rather than contemporary. What the film demonstrates is that hunger still exists for this kind of storytelling when executed with intelligence and craft. Audiences haven't tired of globe-trotting quests, ancient mysteries, and likable characters facing escalating danger. They've tired of derivative execution, CGI-heavy spectacle without stakes, and heroes who never feel genuinely threatened. Fountain of Youth addresses those concerns through practical action, character-driven stakes, and willingness to engage with mature themes. The sibling relationship specifically fills a gap in adventure cinema. Most films in this genre center romantic partnerships or lone wolves, but the Luke-Charlotte dynamic offers something different: complicated family history, shared trauma, competing approaches to problem-solving. That generates dramatic tension without requiring romantic or sexual elements, which feels fresh in a genre that often defaults to boy meets girl while finding treasure formulas. The philosophical engagement with immortality also distinguishes Fountain of Youth from pure escapism. Adventure films traditionally present treasure as unambiguous good, finding it is success. The hero gets rich and rides into sunset. This film interrogates that assumption, asking what cost would make treasure worthless, and whether wisdom sometimes means walking away from what you sought. That moral complexity elevates the material beyond simple quest narrative. What doesn't work? Honest assessment fairness requires acknowledging where Fountain of Youth stumbles. The Owen betrayal, while well acted by Gleeson, telegraphs itself too clearly for viewers even if the characters don't see it coming. Esme's motivations remain frustratingly opaque, less from intentional mystery and more from underwritten character work. The film's middle section sags slightly as it transitions from Thailand action to London investigation, and the pacing doesn't quite recover until the pyramid finale. The hegemony as antagonist organization feels somewhat generic. Wealthy collectors seeking immortality could describe villains from dozens of adventure films. The script doesn't give them enough specificity or ideological coherence to make them truly memorable threats. They function adequately as obstacles, but never achieve the memorable threats. They function adequately as obstacles, but never achieve the memorable villainy that great adventure films require. Some of the dialogue, particularly exposition-heavy sequences, tips into on-the-nose territory. Characters occasionally articulate themes that would land better through subtext, and certain emotional beats are underlined when they'd be more powerful left implied. Vanderbilt's script is generally strong, but these moments of over-explanation suggest studio notes or lack of confidence in audiences reading nuance. The ending's epilogue, while thematically appropriate, might linger too long for viewers seeking clean resolution. The choice to show Charlotte having lost custody and Luke in mundane teaching rather than triumphant closure is dramatically honest, but potentially unsatisfying for genre expectations. It's the right ending for the film's themes, but possibly wrong for audience desires, which is interesting tension, but might leave some viewers cold. The Krasinski-Portman factor, star power in streaming era. One element worth examining is how Fountain of Youth deploys genuine movie stars in an era when star power's commercial viability is constantly questioned. Krasinski and Portman aren't franchise superheroes. They're actors with recognizable names and proven talent who rarely work together in this kind of big-budget adventure context. Their casting signals the film's adult orientation. These aren't young, beautiful people having a sexy adventure. They're 30-somethings with baggage, playing characters dealing with custody battles and father issues while also dodging bullets. That demographic targeting making adventure films for grown-ups rather than teenagers feels deliberate and potentially smart as Hollywood chases increasingly young audiences. Whether star power translates to streaming viewership differently than theatrical box office remains unclear. Do people subscribe to Apple TV Plus specifically to watch a Krasinski-Portman adventure, or do they stumble onto it while browsing? The economics are opaque, but the creative bet that serious actors elevate genre material clearly paid off in performance quality, even if commercial impact is unknowable. Cultural conversations, immortality, anxiety in 2025. The film's arrival coincides with increasing cultural discourse about life extension, technological immortality, and whether death is a problem to be solved. Tech billionaires fund longevity research, medical advances push lifespan boundaries, and transhumanist movements advocate for achieving immortality through technology. Fountain of Youth enters these conversations through a mythological metaphor, asking whether eternal life would be desirable even if achievable. That the film answers no with such conviction that immortality at the cost of connection is explicitly presented as bad deal positions it against prevailing Silicon Valley ideology. The hegemony reads uncomfortably like venture capital pitch meetings where human experience gets optimized through removing inefficient variables like love. Owen's argument that attachment limits potential sounds like actual arguments from actual tech founders about productivity optimization. Whether audiences receive this as commentary on contemporary immortality discourse or just adventure film stakes is unclear. The film doesn't make its critique explicit. There's no ham-fisted dialogue about tech companies. But the thematic alignment is there for viewers primed to see it, which might give Fountain of Youth extended relevance as these debates intensify. What endures? The questions we carry films don't need to be perfect to matter, and Fountain of Youth's imperfections don't negate its achievements. It presents a specific vision of what adventure cinema can be: character-driven, thematically engaged, visually accomplished, and emotionally honest, even within genre frameworks that traditionally prize escapism over introspection. The central question it poses: what would you sacrifice for immortality lingers after the credits, because it doesn't offer easy comfort. The film argues that mortality gives life shape and meaning, that connection matters more than duration, that some prices are too high even for ultimate prizes. Those aren't new ideas, but they're presented with enough narrative specificity and emotional weight to feel freshly considered rather than received wisdom. Luke and Charlotte's journey from estrangement to reconciliation provides the emotional anchor that makes philosophical abstraction concrete. We care about immortality's cost because we'd spent 2 hours with two people learning to value their limited time together. That's the alchemy good filmmaking achieves. Universal themes made particular through specific characters facing concrete choices. Ritchie's direction proves he's more than his early gangster films suggested, capable of working in varied genres while maintaining distinctive voice. The cast demonstrates that star-driven mid-budget films can still work if the material respects audience intelligence and actor capabilities. And the film itself argues for adventure cinema's continued vitality when executed with craft and ambition rather than derivative nostalgia. Fountain of Youth probably won't redefine genre or become the reference point future adventure films measure against, but it exists as proof that this kind of filmmaking, sincere, ambitious, flawed, and genuinely trying to do something meaningful within entertainment frameworks, still has place in contemporary cinema. That might be enough. The fountain's destroyed, the pyramid collapsed, and Luke and Charlotte Truman chose each other over eternity. They're having weekly dinners in Boston now, rebuilding relationship through consistent effort, living finite lives with intentional presence. Richard's ghost is quieter, his research archived, but the obsession ended. Some treasures turn out to be tests, not prizes, and maybe that's the real discovery. Not what's hidden in ancient pyramids, but what we find when we stop chasing immortality long enough to appreciate the mortal, messy, beautiful relationships already in front of us. Adventure films rarely traffic in wisdom, but when they do, when they use spectacle as vehicle for genuine insight, they remind us why storytelling matters beyond mere distraction. Fountain of Youth does that work. Imperfectly, sometimes clumsily, but with enough heart and intelligence to justify the journey. In 2025's media landscape of endless content and disposable entertainment, that feels like its own kind of treasure worth seeking. Understanding Fountain of Youth requires recognizing it's not purely an adventure film. It's a deliberate fusion of heist mechanics, action spectacle, and adventure mythology that operates simultaneously across three genre traditions. This hybrid approach isn't accidental or muddled. It's architectural, each genre contributing specific structural elements that together create something richer than any single tradition could provide. Heist, blueprint beneath adventure surface. Guy Ritchie knows heist films intimately. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch established him as master of that particular criminal choreography. What's clever about Fountain of Youth is how he imports heist structure into treasure hunting, using conventions audiences recognize from Ocean's 11 and the Italian Job to organize what could otherwise feel like aimless globetrotting. Classic heist films follow specific architecture: assemble the crew, plan the job, execute with complications, deal with aftermath. Fountain of Youth maps directly onto this template, with archaeological reskinning. The crew is Luke and Charlotte, each bringing specialized skills: his field experience and charm, her analytical intelligence and authentication expertise. Owen initially reads as the tech specialist, or inside man, someone with institutional access who can open doors the protagonists can't. The British Museum sequence is pure heist execution. They're not stealing the tablet, but the operational logic is identical to any museum robbery. Charlotte provides legitimate cover through academic credentials, requesting official access. Luke creates distractions, drawing security attention away from the actual objective. Owen runs interference, using his university connections to smooth bureaucratic friction. The cross-cutting between these roles, the ticking clock of museum closing time, the tension of maintaining cover while photographing evidence. This is heist filmmaking 101 applied to archaeology. What distinguishes heist films from other crime genres is focus on the plan and its execution, often shown in elaborate detail. Fountain of Youth delivers this through Charlotte's puzzle-solving sequences. When she decodes glyphs or cross-references their father's research, the film presents it with the same procedural satisfaction that heist films provide during planning montages. We see her methodology, watch the pieces connect, experience the intellectual pleasure of problem-solving. It's Riffify's famous silent heist sequence, translated into cryptography. The Thailand tablet acquisition follows similar patterns. Luke's navigated the black market, made contacts, arranged viewing all background logistics that heist films typically show through montage. The escape when things go wrong mirrors the classic heist goes sideways moment that defines films from The Killing to Reservoir Dogs. The planned extraction becomes improvised chaos, forcing the crew to adapt using skills and chemistry built during preparation. But Ritchie also subverts heist conventions in thematically significant ways. Traditional heist films end with either successful theft and criminals getting away rich, or failure due to internal betrayal or external pressure. Fountain of Youth offers a third option: successful completion, followed by deliberate destruction of the prize. Luke and Charlotte execute the quest perfectly. They solve the puzzles, reach the fountain, verify its authenticity. Then they destroy it. This inverts the entire heist genre's moral universe. Films like Ocean's 11 celebrate clever criminals outwitting security and claiming their prize. Fountain of Youth uses that same clever planning and execution to reach something they immediately refuse to claim. The heist structure becomes framework for exploring wisdom and restraint rather than greed and acquisition. That's genre sophistication, using conventions to set up expectations, then pivoting to deliver different meaning. The Owen betrayal also plays with heist tropes. Internal crew betrayal is standard. Think of the twist in The Usual Suspects or the paranoia of Reservoir Dogs. But typically the betrayer is after money or self-preservation. Owen's betraying for ideological reasons, representing institutional interests rather than personal greed. He's not a crew member who went rogue. He was never truly crew, just deep cover operative using the protagonists as bloodhounds. That's a darker spin on familiar betrayal mechanics. Action film DNA and modern conventions simultaneously. Fountain of Youth operates as contemporary action film, following traditions established by everything from Die Hard to Raiders of the Lost Ark. The action genres evolved significantly since the 1980s classical period of muscular heroes and practical stunts through the 1990s CGI proliferation to 2020's return to tactile filmmaking. This film positions itself firmly in that recent practical renaissance. The speedboat chase demonstrates commitment to real stunt work over digital fabrication. Modern action films face constant tension between what's possible through CGI and what's viscerally effective through practical execution. Ritchie clearly studied films like Mad Max, Fury Road, and Mission, impossible sequels that prove audiences respond to authentic danger captured on camera. When Charlotte steers through karst islands with bullets impacting around them, the physicality reads as genuine, because it is. That's Portman on a moving vessel. Real water, actual impacts. Action films are defined by chase sequences, fights, shootouts, explosions, and stunt work. And Fountain of Youth delivers all these elements while using them to reveal character rather than simply provide spectacle. The Blackwood Manor fight isn't just Luke versus hegemony operatives, it's him using intelligence and environment over pure strength, which tells us who he is. The way he improvises weapons from furniture times his escape through window-breaking shows someone who survived through cleverness rather than invincibility. The film also navigates interesting gender dynamics within action conventions. Female action leads have complicated history, from Alien's Ellen Ripley through modern hypersexualized heroines in tight costumes. Charlotte avoids both extremes. She's not masculinized into becoming indistinguishable from male action heroes, but she's also not objectified or made incompetent to contrast with Luke's capability. She drives the speedboat, fights when necessary, makes tactical decisions under pressure, all while remaining recognizably herself rather than action film archetype. Portman's age and appearance also matter here. She's playing a 30-something academic in practical clothing, not a 20-year-old in revealing costume. The film lets her look stressed, exhausted, genuinely frightened, emotional authenticity that hypersexualized action heroines are rarely permitted. When she's soaked and disheveled after underwater escapes, it reads as survival rather than titillation. That's progress in how action films present capable women. The action spectacle serves narrative progression rather than existing for its own sake, which aligns with contemporary action filmmaking's better instincts. Every set piece advances plot or character. The Thailand chase establishes danger and forces alliance with Esme. The museum near miss raises stakes and triggers Owen's betrayal. The pyramid firefight creates conditions for final choice. There's no action padding, no sequences included, just because trailers need footage. Ritchie's background in kinetic editing and British action aesthetics, see Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes films, gives Fountain of Youth distinct flavor within American action traditions. The whip pans and freeze frames feel more European than Hollywood, creating stylistic signature that prevents the film from blending into generic action product. It's recognizably part of action genre while maintaining directorial identity. Adventure tradition. Mythology meets psychology. The adventure film elements provide the quest structure and mythological framework that differentiate this from pure heist or action. Adventure cinema has specific conventions, exotic locations, ancient mysteries, artifacts with power, protagonists who are explorers or archaeologists rather than criminals or soldiers, Raiders of the Lost Ark, codified modern adventure templates, establishing the treasure-hunting academic as archetypal hero. Fountain of Youth both honors and interrogates that tradition. Luke and Charlotte are following their archaeologist father's research, decoding ancient civilizations, pursuing mythological artifact across continents. Pure adventure film setup. The locations, Thailand's temples, London's museums, underwater pyramids, provide the visual exoticism adventure films require. The puzzles and clues create intellectual engagement that separates adventure from pure action. But where classic adventure films like Indiana Jones present archaeology as exciting treasure hunt with minimal ethical complication, Fountain of Youth foregrounds the moral dimensions. Should they disturb ancient sites? Who has rights to these discoveries? What responsibility comes with knowledge? Charlotte particularly embodies these concerns, her academic training making her conscious of preservation ethics. Luke's more cavalier approach ignores. The Fountain itself subverts adventure film's typical relationship with discovered artifacts. Usually the treasure is genuinely valuable gold, jewels, technology. Heroes want to claim it for museums or personal gain. Villains want it for power or wealth. Here, the artifact's value is its danger, and the heroic choice is destruction rather than preservation or exploitation. That's adventure film structure used to deliver anti-adventure message. Some discoveries should remain hidden. The film also updates adventure traditions around colonialism and cultural appropriation that plague older examples. Instead of Western heroes plundering non-Western cultures' treasures, The Fountain's origins are deliberately vague, predating known civilizations, belonging to no specific culture. This sidesteps problematic Indiana Jones dynamics, where American academic claims ownership of other nations' heritage. The treasure here is humanity's, and the threat comes from organizations trying to privatize it. Simultaneous genre operation, when all three align. The pyramid finale demonstrates how effectively Fountain of Youth operates across all three genres simultaneously. It's heist film, in how the infiltration is planned and executed. Esme's coalition, providing resources, Luke and Charlotte using their father's research as blueprint, the operation structured around retrieving specific objective. It's action film in the firefight between factions, the physical danger, the stunt work of underwater navigation and combat. It's adventure film in the mythological discovery, the ancient location's wonder, the moral test the Fountain represents. Watch how the sequence shifts between genre modes. The approach to the pyramid is adventure awe at impossible structure, excitement of discovery. The confrontation with Owen and hegemony forces is action gunfire, tactical positioning, physical combat. The decision about what to do with the Fountain is Heist the crew, now just Luke and Charlotte, making final call about the job's completion. These aren't separate sequences, they're interwoven, often operating simultaneously within single scenes. This works because each genre contributes different emotional register. Heist provides intellectual satisfaction of plans executed. Action provides visceral excitement of danger overcome. Adventure provides wonder and moral weight of discovery confronted. Together they create experience that's richer than any single genre could provide. We're engaged cerebrally, physically, and ethically all at once. What makes this fusion effective rather than muddled is clarity of purpose. Ritchie knows which genre he's emphasizing in each moment, and why. He's not randomly mixing elements. He's deliberately constructing hybrid that uses each tradition's strengths, while minimizing weaknesses. Heist structure prevents adventure from feeling aimless. Adventure mythology prevents heist from feeling aimless. Adventure mythology prevents both from becoming talky and static. Why most genre hybrids fail, and this one succeeds. Hybrid genre films are notoriously difficult to execute well. Studios often mandate genre mixing for market appeal. It's a heist film, but also a comedy, but also a comedy, but also a romance, resulting in tonal chaos that satisfies no one. Films end up being bad examples of multiple genres rather than good fusion. Fountain of Youth avoids this primarily through thematic coherence. The genres aren't just stitched together. They're serving unified theme about family, mortality, and what's worth pursuing. The heist structure explores what success means when you reach your goal. The action elements test characters' commitment under pressure. The adventure mythology provides framework for asking whether immortality is worth its cost. Everything connects to central questions the film's investigating. The sibling dynamic also unifies disparate genre elements. In heist films, crew chemistry is everything. In action films, protagonist relationships create stakes beyond physical survival. In adventure films, who you're traveling with matters as much as where you're going. Luke and Charlotte's evolving relationship functions across all three genres, giving each tradition's conventions emotional grounding. Ritchie's directorial consistency helps too. His visual style, kinetic editing, roaming camera, procedural detail works across heist planning, action execution, and adventure discovery. The genre might shift, but the filmmaking language remains coherent, preventing tonal whiplash that ruins weaker hybrids. The film also respects each genre's requirements rather than treating them as obstacles. It delivers genuine heist satisfaction in the planning and execution sequences. It provides authentic action thrills through practical stunts and visceral danger. It creates real adventure wonder in exotic locations and mythological discovery. You could watch Fountain of Youth as primarily heist, action, or adventure film, and feel satisfied. The hybrid enhances rather than dilutes. Genre as creative framework, not constraint. What Fountain of Youth ultimately demonstrates is that genre works best as toolkit rather than rulebook. Ritchie's pulling techniques from Heist, action, and adventure traditions because each provides specific capabilities for the story he's telling. He's not slavishly following conventions or deliberately subverting them. He's using them as needed, discarding what doesn't serve his purposes. This pragmatic approach to genre is becoming increasingly common in contemporary filmmaking as rigid, categorical boundaries dissolve. Streaming platforms categorize films with multiple tags. Audiences expect tonal flexibility. The idea that movies must be purely one thing feels increasingly outdated. Fountain of Youth reflects that evolution. It's whatever genre it needs to be in each moment to tell its story effectively. For viewers, understanding these genre mechanics deepens appreciation. Recognizing Heist structure helps you appreciate how carefully Charlotte's investigative sequences are constructed. Knowing action film history makes you notice the deliberate choice of practical stunts over CGI. Understanding adventure traditions reveals how the film both honors and critiques that lineage. The pleasure multiplies when you can see the craftsmanship behind the fusion. Fountain of Youth stands as proof that genre hybrids can work when executed with intelligence and coherent vision. It's not reinventing cinema or creating entirely new categories. It's skillfully deploying existing tools in service of story that benefits from their combination. That might be more valuable than innovation demonstrating that familiar elements, thoughtfully arranged, can still produce fresh experiences. The treasure Luke and Charlotte sought turned out to be test rather than prize. The genres Ritchie's working with turn out to be resources rather than restrictions, and the film itself becomes something more interesting than pure heist, pure action, or pure adventure. It's all three working in harmony to explore themes that matter, using spectacle as vehicle for substance. That's the real genre convergence, not just mixing elements, but making them collaborate toward unified purpose. Fountain of Youth achieves that synthesis imperfectly, but admirably, proving there's still room in contemporary cinema for ambitious hybrids that trust audiences to appreciate complexity.